Chapter 1697. As Lu Li thought about it, he continued to compress the formation. Originally, he wanted to use his own yuan qi to put some pressure on Zhang Yan. However, after trying for a long time, he realized that the other party's yuan qi was endless. Although the formation seemed to be unstable, it was actually very stable. Based on this point, he guessed that the other party either had something that could replenish yuan qi, or had cultivated for a long time and had extremely rich yuan qi. If this went on, he would not be able to achieve his goal. Thinking about it, he decided to use another method. This time, he did not try to shake the formation. Instead, he visualized it with his mind. In an instant, there was a flow of qi around him. It looked like he was preparing to create a formation that was exactly the same as the one here. A true young mighty warrior had the ability to achieve anything he wanted. He did not need to know how the formation worked. As long as he looked at the things here and thought about it, he would naturally be able to recreate it. Of course, this was because the 9-link extinguishing yang formation was simple and there was no stabilizing treasure in it. Even if he recreated it, it would not consume much yuan qi. Therefore, he could copy it completely. If he changed it to an exquisite formation, it might not be possible. Seeing him do this, Zhang Yan could not help but think. Even if this demon set up another formation, the best situation would be to protect himself. It would be difficult for it to pose any threat to the person in charge of the formation, let alone force him out of the formation. However, he would not do useless things. Thinking about it again, he might be trying to see through the mysteries of the formation by shining it on him. After understanding it thoroughly, he would come out to break the formation. Of course, this was just a guess and might not be true. However, one thing was certain. The other party did have the method to replenish yuan qi. After all, Fu Qingming and Dan Yi had used more than a year to set up 5 formations. It was not that they could not be faster, but they had to ensure that they did not lose too much yuan qi. However, this person had accomplished it in an instant. It was impossible that he did not have something to rely on. Even though he was unable to see through the other party's true objective, he didn't just stand there and wait. Instead, he started to deduce the other party's exact location. Previously, he had sparred with the demons a few times, and found that they all had the ability to evade. As long as he calculated, he would be left with nothing. Only later did he realize that it wasn't because the demons were brilliant, but because he had just grasped the secret technique and hadn't been able to display its true power. Now, along with the improvement of his Dao technique, the might of this technique had improved greatly since a long time ago, and it seemed to be even more concealed and restrained. So long as he didn't strike immediately when he schemed against his opponent, then the person he schemed against would most likely be unable to notice it. The reason why he couldn't do it completely was because there were some treasures that might be able to detect the changes in aura. If the demon was carrying such a treasure, it would be detected if he wasn't careful. Therefore, he was very cautious when he made his move. After this test, he found that the other party's aura was erratic, but it wasn't completely unfathomable. He had a feeling that as long as he was willing, he was very confident that he could locate the demon's exact location. By then, with the help of the celestial serpent bracelet, he might be able to kill his way into the demon's primordial sea. But it was not the right time yet. The demon must have something to rely on since he dared to come alone. Therefore, he just made a mental note of it and waited for the right time to make his move. On Lu Li's side, after he visualized the formation, he glanced back and forth and had a general idea. As a matter of fact, this was just the surface of the formation. When the formation mechanism really changed, it would be a different story. If he wanted to see through the many mysteries of the formation, he would have to concentrate and meditate. Obviously, he couldn't do it now. Fortunately, this was enough for him. The reason why he did this was to facilitate his next move. At this moment, he put up his index and middle fingers, made a gesture on the spot and chanted, "There are insects in the world. They are as large as the universe and as small as the dust. They are everywhere, there is no place they can't stay, free and unrestrained, self-sufficient, as he chanted, the formation under his feet gradually collapsed, and this trend gradually spread outwards, from the inside to the outside, gradually affecting the outside world. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. He could feel that the formation he was presiding over was actually showing signs of collapsing on its own. However, the other party didn't pressure it with yuan qi at this moment. This should be caused by other reasons. He concentrated at once. Soon, he found the real reason. At this moment, there were countless tiny insects gnawing at the foundation of the formation and blocking the qi movement. As the formation was being eroded, the number of insects was increasing and the damage they could cause was also increasing. These insects actually didn't exist. They were created by Lu Li just now with his mind. The purpose of their existence in the world was to destroy the formation. This was not something that could be done easily. Only when the visualization of will of God had reached a certain level and was in perfect harmony with one's own yuan qi could it be done in an instant. If it were another true yang cultivator, even if they could do it, it would take them a lot of time. Also, they wouldn't be able to do it as easily and quickly as Lu Li did. Zhang Yan could tell that the insects didn't become so powerful at the beginning. Instead, they gradually grew stronger through eating similar formations. Only then could they cause great damage. Just now, the demon had copied the formation around him. It should be for this purpose. It existed as the first mouthful of food. Also, if he wanted to destroy the insects, the other party could respond with yuan qi and stop him from doing so. Instead, they would compete with yuan qi. However, this time, the other party had the upper hand. The arrangement here was very ingenious. It could be said that it was a small gain. This was also the first time he saw yuan qi and will of God used like this. The other party was indeed a demon that had existed for countless years. It was much better than the scarlet rat demon he met before. Moreover, the demon's vision was brilliant and its judgment of the situation was accurate. Even though they were enemies, Lu Li couldn't help but admire the demon. Theoretically, at this point, he should give up on this formation and retreat to the second formation. However, he thought that since the other party could destroy the first formation, he should be able to destroy the second formation, the third formation, or even more. Under normal circumstances, he would be happy to observe the other party's methods and learn from it. However, it was different now. This was a battle of life and death. As long as there was a chance to turn things around, he couldn't retreat so easily. At this moment, in the depths of the heaven realm, Dan Yi and the other two were refining their artifacts. However, they could see what was going on outside. They also noticed what caused the formation to collapse. Ichido said in a low voice, "It's a pity. If the formation outside could attack, the demon wouldn't be able to do it so easily." Fu Qingming shook his head and said, "If it was an offensive formation, it's not impossible to break it. It can only be said that the demon dealt with it perfectly." Ichido also knew this. However, he only felt pity for the formation itself. It should be known that formations could be coordinated with each other. If it was just a single formation, not only would its power increase, it wouldn't be easily destroyed. However, there wasn't enough time, so it couldn't be perfected. Thinking of this, he had a thought. He raised his head and said, "Everyone, do you think that if we go forward and help now, we can work together to kill this demon?" Fu Qingming shook his head and said, "We can't. That demon gave up on the battle over there and came here instead. That means he's trying to pin us down and disrupt our setup. I'm guessing that he should have a treasure in his possession that can protect him. Even if he's surrounded by several people, he won't be afraid. Now that we've gone out, it's very likely that we've fallen into his trap." Dan Yi agreed with his opinion. "We don't need to play tricks. As long as we set up everything that needs to be set up, even if the four of them come, we can fight face to face." After a pause, he said seriously, "We believe in Daoist Zhang's ability. With him guarding outside, there shouldn't be any problems." After thinking for a while, Zhang Yan came up with a countermeasure. He focused slightly and visualized a forbidden formation in his divine decree. This formation was also obtained from the Kun residence. However, without the previous 9 formations, it would have been impossible to create it so quickly. Seeing that it was completed, he didn't hesitate and immediately projected it into the real world and stacked it on top of the original formation. The 2 formations were originally of the same lineage. Now that they were connected, a completely new change was born. Luli was originally very happy to see that the formation was about to be broken. However, suddenly, his senses became very sluggish, as if the world had suddenly become a blur. It was just that his senses were blocked. He tried to use some strength and he could still force his way through. However, if he relaxed a bit, it would return to its original state. Under such circumstances, it became very difficult to protect the insects. At this moment, Zhang Yan took advantage of this gap and used his yuan qi to kill those bugs. His real goal wasn't to get rid of these things. Even if they were completely eliminated, as long as the other party was still alive, he could still see them. He just wanted to let them know that he had a way to solve these things. If they continued, it would only be a repeat of the original stalemate. He didn't mind dragging it out. After Luli realized that he couldn't do anything, he didn't persist and gave up on the insects. He thought, no wonder Ji Yen died in the hands of this person. He really isn't simple. Back then, when the 4 of them sensed Ji Yan's death, they suspected that it was Lu Lin and the others. Later, with the appearance of Bushutian, they found out that it was someone else. Among the 4 demons, Yuan Zun, Dai Gong had actually fought with Zhang Yan. However, at that time, he was only using his avatar. Moreover, he was lured into the Qi Lu by Zhang Yan. Even though his original body wasn't injured, his memories were covered during the battle. This experience was as good as not existing, so it was hard for him to explain it to the others. Luli thought about it again and thought, since normal means can't defeat the opponent in a short period of time, then I will have to use my secret skills. His expression turned serious, and a page appeared in his divine will. There were countless golden characters floating on it. Then, he focused his mind and activated it. In an instant, rays of clear light spread out. It looked grand and pure, without any filth. Wherever the light passed, everything turned into nothingness, leaving only a sense of tranquility. The formation that blocked the outside also melted like ice and snow, disappearing in an instant. Chapter 1698. Xiantian demons could walk in Busa Tian, but it was not because of treasures. Before they had Dao treasures, they already had many powerful methods. Lu Li's Golden Page book was a scripture that he had visualized for many years. It was called the Fundamental Superior Scripture. Its purpose was to affirm the principle that humans were lowly, and to belittle the living. Of course, this was not belittling for the sake of belittling, but to describe the law. Once humanity perished, the universe would be turned around, and the demons would flourish. They would then be able to take advantage of the situation and complete this Tao. At that time, the words of this scripture would be the heavenly law, and the great Tao. Now, in the 10,000 worlds, humans were the leaders of all living things. This was because humans were the most suitable to cultivate Tao. However, if one could reconstruct the principles of heaven and earth, and place this scripture into the universe, and replace the original foundation, then from then on, humans would be lowly, and would be despised by the heavenly law. The original path to the upper realm would be blocked. If one wanted to find the cultivation method, he would have to enter through this door. At that time, the demons would naturally become the rulers of this world. The most important thing was that in the past, when they cultivated Tao, they followed the teachings of their predecessors. It seemed like they were benefiting from it, but when they reached a certain realm, something was wrong. This was because the Tao of humanity was not the Tao of demons. They were not compatible with each other. Even if they received the teachings, and it seemed like they had obtained a great fortune, in reality, they had cut off their future path. Even if there was a chance in the future, it would be difficult for them to reach the upper realm. Therefore, not only did they not see the person who taught them as a benefactor, they saw him as an enemy. Once this great method was completed, the world would change, and everything in the past could be abandoned. the door to the great Tao would be reopened. This scripture was the fundamental method, and by studying it, one day, they might be able to reach the upper realm. Therefore, today's battle could be said to be a battle between races, a battle between spells, and a battle between the great Tao. This fundamental superior class scripture was created by 4 people. Right now, each person's understanding was slightly different, but it was more or less the same. However, after all, each person's way of thinking was different. Right now, they did not separate because their strength was concentrated in one place. In the future, when the matter was settled, only then would they separate, spread branches and leaves, and establish their own sects. This scripture contained the 4 great fundamental mantras, the 12 great self-observation mantras, the 36 successful cultivation mantras, and the 72 lesser world-opening mantras. However, everyone cultivated different incantations. This wasn't because they couldn't be used together. Rather, only when they were focused and sincere would they be able to display great power. At this moment, this strand of clear light that descended was one of the 12 great mantras, and it was called the World Purification Light. So long as it was released, it would eliminate all the filth in the world. The so-called filth did not refer to the clean and turbid things in the world. Instead, it referred to the things that he deemed unfavorable to him. If it was unfavorable to him, then it was naturally a turbid thing. At this moment, as soon as the pure light appeared, the grand formation was naturally unable to withstand it, and it was about to vanish without a trace. It was not difficult for Zhang Yan to see how powerful this light was. Now, not only was the formation instantly broken, even the aura that he had placed within it was weakened. He tried to stop it, but found that it was only a wisp of light, but he had to use a lot of vital energy to block it. If this continued, he would definitely be at a disadvantage. At this stage, if he couldn't find a way to deal with the pure light, then he could only give up on this grand formation. But if he retreated in the face of just one demon, if he waited for all of them to come over, wouldn't he have to give up on this grand formation? This was why he felt that unless he had no other choice, he couldn't retreat. He had to think of a way to defend this place. Since that was the case, then he had to find a way to break out of this situation. He could sense that this light wasn't formed purely from vital energy, but from the will of the God. From this, he could deduce that this was a method of using the will of the God, and it was similar to the 9-world restriction formation path. The books that he had seen before, as well as the Tao discussions with people of the same generation, had actually vaguely mentioned this. However, as to how to use it, this involved the secrets of each person and couldn't be said out loud. Moreover, even if one was taught and could cultivate exactly the same as the predecessors, it was just copying. It wasn't something that belonged to oneself, and only by jumping out of the box could one see one's true self. To deal with such a divine ability, he also needed to use the same method to deal with it. Currently, the most powerful of his will was the 9-world formation path, but it was also considered a killing move. Since it wasn't a life and death battle, it wasn't convenient to reveal it. Since that was the case, then there was only one way, and that was to create a temporary object to block it. Since the other party could visualize those insects to break the formation, then he could also use a similar object to protect it. Thinking about this, he immediately visualized. As his yuan qi continued to be consumed, shiny jade seeds began to appear out of nowhere in this mysterious place. After a short while, he opened his eyes and immediately shone it into the real world, sprinkling it into the broken restriction formation. Once these things landed, the expansion of the pure light was actually blocked. Although the formation was broken a lot, under the infusion of his vital energy, it was gradually repaired. These seeds were nourished by the pure light. Although the pure light also had the ability to melt everything, and the seeds were constantly being killed, as long as they were not completely destroyed, then the invasion of the pure light could be stopped. If the subsequent support of the vitality was not exhausted, when it grew to a certain point, it might be able to counterattack. This kind of seed was not purely his imagination, but the glazed lotus cup in the hidden jade embryo relic. Both of these things had the ability to absorb all external qi. If he were to create it from the beginning to the end, it would be extremely difficult, or at least, it would not be as smooth as it was now. Lu Li was surprised to see that the world-purifying light could not be as unrestrained as before. After careful observation, he immediately figured out the reason and couldn't help but praise. He had thought that once this method was used, the formation wouldn't be able to stop him, but he didn't expect the opponent to come up with such a method. The situation here was pulled back to the situation where the two sides consumed each other's vitality. He pondered for a moment and chanted again. This time, what he was going to use was another self-observing mantra, called Destroying Difficulty Killing Mantra, which could directly hit the opponent's location. Just now, because the formation was broken a lot, he slightly captured a trace of Zhang Yan's qi movement. With this, he could use this magic to chase after the opponent and plant evil qi in him. If the opponent was not well prepared, it was not impossible to destroy the Dharmakaya. Zhang Yan's eyes focused, and suddenly felt an inexplicable qi movement suddenly rushed into his Dharmakaya. This was like a sharp sword piercing in, and it was unscrupulously killing the vitality. However, he had fought all the way here, and he was always on guard at all times. He didn't relax for a moment, and there was always a trace of consciousness in defense. So at this moment, even if the qi movement reached his body, it was not to the point of being out of control. Moreover, this was his home ground, and when he exerted his full strength, he suppressed the qi movement from the outside, and did not allow it to continue to expand the results of the battle. At the same time, he was also thinking about how he did not have any warning signs of this magic beforehand. It was really amazing, and the way it was used here was worth watching. At this moment, Lu Li was also a little surprised. According to his assumption, even if this mantra could not seriously injure Zhang Yan, it should be able to make him unable to take care of everything outside. But in fact, the formation was still unusually stable, and there was no sign of chaos. But this was not the end of the matter. The destroying difficulty killing mantra was not that easy to break. It would take root in the opponent's Dharmakaya, and as long as the opponent was not dead, it could continue to send vitality into the opponent's Dharmakaya, and maintain a trace of the mantra. As long as there was a chance, it could be activated again. His mantra might be powerful, but it benefited from his daily accumulation and diligent cultivation. He did not know how many years it took to visualize it bit by bit. In comparison, Zhang Yan had just reached the genuine yang, and even though his vitality was strong and was superior to all his peers, he lacked the time to accumulate it, and could not completely turn it into combat strength. This was like a huge tide in the ocean. It could clearly set off boundless waves, but the runoff was so narrow that it could not be released to the outside world, so the whaley could not be released. However, his own advantage still existed, and this was something that could not be erased. If he was placed in a battle formation, then he would have an endless supply of energy. As long as he was not suppressed in an instant, then he would not be able to be completely defeated. Lu Li tried to use his vitality to stimulate the qi movement, wanting to use the mantra to disturb the opponent, but after a period of time, he found that there was not much progress. Not only did the formation not collapse, but even the qi movement showed signs of gradually shrinking. He had a feeling that if this continued, it might be suppressed to the point where he could not sense it. At that time, it did not matter whether the mantra existed or not. He thought for a while. He had mastered a total of 3 of the 12 mantras, and now he had used 2 in a row, but he still could not do anything to the opponent. For a powerful warrior of the genuine yang, being hit by a mantra or even a mantra below it was completely useless. Therefore, only the 3rd mantra could be used to break the situation. Of course, he was not using it carelessly. The opponent was now resisting 2 mantras. It seemed that he could still hold on, but he might not be able to resist the 3rd one. If he used it, it was very likely that he would become the straw that broke the camel's back. Therefore, he made a gesture and cast another mantra of impermanence. This was used to disturb the opponent's vitality. If it succeeded, he could immediately turn the situation around. Although Zhang Yan was maintaining the formation and himself at the same time, in fact, he was secretly using the changes in the formation to share some of the pressure on himself. The consumption of vitality was still within a certain limit, and it was not as difficult as it seemed. In fact, he already had the strength to fight back, but he hid it and did not move. He pretended to be weak in order to lure the opponent out. At this moment, he suddenly felt a strange feeling. He knew that something had changed. He immediately calmed his mind and guarded his vitality. As long as he was sure that he was not injured, then he would definitely be fine. The price he had to pay was only vitality. At this moment, it was as if there was a gust of wind blowing past him, but he did not move. The chi movement could not wash down, and in an instant, it disappeared again. When Luli used the mantra, he found that this time it was as if it had hit nothing. It did not have the desired effect at all. He knew that this move had failed. He could not help but become serious. He had thought that there was no need to use a Tao artifact to deal with a person of the human Tao, Yuan Zun. But now, he had to seriously consider this possibility. Chapter 1699. Luli still had the fundamental incantation that he had yet to use. This incantation was extremely powerful and was one of the 4 fundamental incantations of the superior scripture. He believed that if he used it, he would be able to defeat his opponent. However, he would have to pay a heavy price to use it. It would not be an exaggeration to say that he was risking his life. Since he had a Tao artifact, he did not have to do such a thing. After some consideration, he grabbed a square seal in his sleeve. On top of it was the handle of heaven and earth, and on the bottom was the engraving of yin and yang. This item was called the Imperial Seal of Xian Yuan. It could be described in one sentence: the righteousness of heaven and earth, the power to control all things. When the imperial host obtained this seal, he could make all living beings obey him. When used in battle, even if his true Yang peers were unable to force him to submit, as long as there was a moment of carelessness, it would be enough for the imperial host to use his killing technique. However, he had not refined this item before. If he was used to using it, he would usually store it in his divine decree. When he needed to use it, there was no need to call it out. At this moment, Zhang Yan felt that the opponent seemed to have paused and a sense of danger. He immediately realized that the demon was about to make a move. He had not gotten rid of his internal problems. If he waited for the opponent to make a move, then he would be in a passive position. Therefore, he had to counterattack. At least, he had to make the opponent unable to use his moves. With this thought, a ray of sword light appeared in his divine decree. It was like a flickering shadow. Almost at the same time it appeared, it had already attacked. The flying sword killing technique was the technique that he had used the most before he became a true Yang cultivator, so he was extremely familiar with the minute details of it. Not only could he activate it with just a thought, it was also powered by his vast Yuan Qi, so its power wasn't weak. At this moment, Luli suddenly felt that something was wrong. However, the ray of sword light arrived in an instant. By the time he realized it, he had already been hit. He felt a part of his Yuan Qi was taken away, and it was still being taken away. He felt the threat here. If he let it stay, there might be big trouble in the future. At this moment, he could not care about using the Imperial Seal of Xian Yuan anymore. He hurriedly drove it away. When Zhang Yan saw that he had restrained himself, he knew that his goal had been achieved. He then used all his strength to deal with the curse that had invaded his avatar. Without the master of divine ability to instill vitality, the curse was like water without a source, and was quickly suppressed by him. However, when it had retreated to the smallest point, it was difficult to get rid of it. At this moment, a method to dispel the curse automatically appeared. He swept his gaze over and coldly snorted. He didn't bother with it at all, and with a thought, he erased it. Luli felt it as well. He closed his eyes and grinned. The scripture to dispel the curse was actually another trick that he had hidden. The unbreakable killing curse was one of the great curses, and the most powerful thing about it was that it was like maggots attached to one's bones. However, if one wanted to remove it, it was very simple. All one had to do was recite the scripture once, and it would be fine. However, this method was also from a superior scripture. If one did this, it would mean that one had first acknowledged the principles of the scripture. This was especially so for true Yang cultivators, who had the ability to achieve anything they wanted. Once one acknowledged it, one's mind would unknowingly be invaded by it, and a crack would be pried open. One had to know that this scripture was entrusted by 4 Khanate demons, and they could even work together. If one had this method to invade, and used it together with a great curse, they might be able to reform it and become one of their own. However, he also knew that such a good thing was hard to come by, so he didn't pay too much attention to it. At this time, he also ran into some trouble. The sword light seemed to refer to the characteristics of his great curse, and it could cut off the vitality in his body for its own use. Moreover, it was moving around, and it was very difficult to catch, so he could only focus on dealing with it first. For a moment, the two of them didn't move, and the place became quiet. After Zhang Yan circulated it there for a moment, he realized that under normal circumstances, he would need to enter a meditative state to expel this foreign qi, and it might take a long time. However, the opponent definitely wouldn't need that long to break free first, and that would be disadvantageous to him. He thought about it again. This was also considered an external qi, and he could use the glazed lotus cup to try and see if he could swallow it. Thinking of this, he immediately channeled his own vitality into the glazed lotus cup, and with this action, the edges of the lotus petals actually gradually turned black. Originally, his vitality was already compatible with the treasure cup, and as its owner, no matter how he circulated it, the treasure would not show such changes. However, with the great curse entangled with it, it was different, and at this moment, after going around the magic treasure, it was naturally intercepted. Very soon, he expelled the great curse completely. Lu Li's aura was the same as his great curse, and when there was a change here, his eyelids unconsciously moved. He could predict that the great curse most likely wouldn't last long, but he didn't expect the great curse to disappear so quickly. Almost at the same time, he also grabbed that strand of sword qi, snorted, and successfully expelled it. After Zhang Yan dealt with the external qi, he noticed that Lu Li was free, so he didn't attack again. Instead, he reorganized the formation to act as a barrier. As for what the opponent was going to do, he already had some guesses. After failing to succeed a few times, it was possible that he would use a Dao artifact. Regarding this, he didn't try to stop it, because he would have to face it sooner or later. It was just that the power of each Dao artifact was different, and he didn't know which one this person had. At this time, Lu Li also didn't hesitate anymore, opened his palm, and revealed the imperial seal of Xian Yuan. Then, he circulated his vitality and threw it towards the sky. Seeing a square seal in the sky, Zhang Yan couldn't help but raise his head to take a look, and instantly felt that everything in the void changed. Where a true yang cultivator stood, all living things would obey him. However, if two people were to fight, they would use their vital energy to decide who was superior. However, when this treasure seal appeared, it completely changed the direction, as if this treasure seal was the true master of heaven and earth, and all living things had to follow it. Because of what Dan Yi had said before, he immediately recognized the origin of this treasure, and understood that if he fought under this item, he would be restricted by it, to the extent that he wouldn't be able to use his full strength. Therefore, with a thought, the glazed lotus flower cup appeared in the spirit will, and a clear light spread out, shining on his Dharma body, and he couldn't help but feel his body lighten, as if some burden had been removed. After Lu Li used this treasure, he felt that he had a 90% chance of success, so he followed Zhang Yan's aura, and once again used the great mantra of observing self, but he wanted to take advantage of the situation, and defeat Zhang Yan in one move, forcing him to call out the others to help. This time, Zhang Yan had the lotus flower cup to protect himself, and it also received the external mantra, so it didn't affect him at all. Taking the opportunity to look at the lotus flower cup, he found that the turbid color on the petals was spreading very quickly. Originally, he tried to dissolve the turbid air, but he found that even if he did so, he still couldn't catch up to the speed of the turbid air. At this rate, very soon, the entire lotus flower cup would be filled, and at that time, without any protection, it would be impossible for him to fight back. Therefore, at this moment, there were only two choices, either to retreat and seek help from the people behind, or to directly attack the owner. As long as he could kill or heavily injure the person behind, then this treasure naturally wouldn't be a threat. The way he did things, he always took the initiative to move forward, and naturally wouldn't choose the first option, but it was obvious that ordinary means couldn't take down this person, so he no longer hesitated, and decided to use a killing move. At once, he used the incantation, and immediately calculated Lu Li's position. At the same time, he also felt a trace of resistance, and knew that this was the evasive method of this demon. In the past, it was very likely that he would not be able to reach Lu Li, but it was different from before. He had the help of the heaven-melding serpent bracelet, so he wouldn't be easily evaded. With a flash of the treasure, the serpent and the flood dragon on it seemed to come to life in an instant, and carried his vast yuan-qi. This was equivalent to forcing the opponent to compete in yuan-qi, and if the opponent couldn't win, then immediately the opponent would be invaded into the sea of yuan-qi. But at this time, the treasure also seemed to be somewhat unable to withstand, and let out a cry. At the same time, Lu Li suddenly felt a sense of impending disaster, but before he could react, with a loud bang, he saw that his sea of yuan-qi had already been smashed open, and at the same time, there seemed to be a burst of golden light, and then everything shattered with a loud bang. It seemed like a long time had passed, but it also seemed like an instant. Lu Li suddenly opened his eyes amidst the indistinct and boundless darkness, and he noticed that he was still standing in the formation. He pondered for a moment and couldn't help but be surprised to find that he had actually been killed once just now. For a true Yang cultivator to determine a victor and a loser, it would take a long time. Being killed so suddenly was really terrifying. Fortunately, he had the mysterious beginning sun mirror. As long as his yuan-qi wasn't exhausted, no matter how many times he was killed, he could start over. Unfortunately, because he had been killed once, it was the same as being erased from the past, so he didn't know what had happened just now. Otherwise, he would have been able to see what had happened. In the depths of the inner realm, Dan Yi and the other two had been paying attention to the battle. They sensed that Zhang Yan had killed his way into his sea of yuan-qi and thought that the outcome was already decided. They didn't expect him to walk out of the void in the next moment. Dan Yi also guessed what had helped him. He said in a low voice, "It's the mysterious beginning sun mirror. It seems that the treasure has fallen into his hands. No wonder those fiendish demons dared to send him over." Michihito Ichido frowned and said, "Is there any way to break it?" Dan Yi shook his head and said, "Unless my yuan-qi is exhausted, I can't do anything to him." On Zhang Yan's side, when he saw that Lu Li had once again appeared in front of him unharmed, he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. Then, he revealed a pondering expression. Unlike the latter, he clearly remembered everything just now. However, at that moment, he felt that what he had killed was only a shadow of the future, but it was also somewhat plausible. There seemed to be even more mysteries that he couldn't see through, but he was certain that what Lu Li had was the mysterious beginning sun mirror. However, it didn't matter, because he had heard from Dan Yi that those who used the sun mirror could come back no matter how many times they were killed, but at that time, their consciousness wouldn't exist. This meant that if he could kill them once, he could kill them a second time until they ran out of yuan-qi. However, he couldn't use the heaven-sealing snake hoop in a short period of time, so he had to think of a way to deal with the Xian Yuan Imperial Seal. Chapter 1700. Zhang Yan was very clear in his heart, with that Xian Yuan Imperial Seal hanging above his head, it was equivalent to the other party having control over the entire situation. Over time, not only would he be restrained here, even the formation around him might be controlled, so he had to think of a way to solve it. But just now, even though he did not succeed in killing Lu Li, he had found a breakthrough point. Just at the moment Lu Li was killed and returned, that Xian Yuan Imperial Seal showed signs of a slight delay, as if in that instant, it had already lost its master's control. This phenomenon clearly showed that Lu Li did not put much effort into this treasure. Not only could he not infuse it into the will of the spirit, he could not control it as he wished. This seemed a little unbelievable, but it was actually very normal. Everyone could use Dao weapons, as long as you had enough cultivation and mana, you could use it the moment you got it. But if you wanted to use it as you wished, you could only refine it for a long time. The more focused you were, the more power you could unleash. If you were greedy, it was very likely that you would become mediocre. Back then, the the human path cultivators only had one each, and did not take more. Of course, this also had something to do with the small number of Dao weapons. There might be people who hid a few in their hands and did not show it to others, or did not have the time to refine it. It was unknown. Lu Li had the mysterious beginning sun mirror in hand. With this treasure, he could defend against anything. As long as he unearthed the hidden potential within it, he did not need to care about anything else. Moreover, at the same time that the mysterious beginning sun mirror made people fearless of life and death, it also used up a lot of energy, so it was not very likely for him to control a second one at the same time. At this moment, Zhang Yan was thinking, if he could find the right opportunity to kill him again, and cut off the master's connection to his aura, then he might be able to snatch the treasure. If he had such a Dao weapon in hand, then his side would not be as passive as before. But to do such a thing, it consumed a lot of energy. Back then when he killed the red rat demon, he used up more than half of his energy. But at that time, it was because he was not proficient in using the technique, and his understanding of the Tao was not at the level it was now, and his mana was growing every moment. The present was already different from the past. Just now, he had used up about 30% of his primordial qi. Even if he used it 1 or 2 more times, it wouldn't be enough. Aside from that, there was another problem to consider. Just now, half of the reason why things were going so smoothly was because of the heavenly serpent flood dragon. After all, this treasure was not a Dao item and could only be used once in a short period of time. If he used it again, he might not be able to withstand it, so he could only rely on himself. Fortunately, he had killed his way in once the last time. Thus, he already had a rough idea of how to avoid it. All he needed to do was to make some more deductions. Even if he could not completely break it, he would still be able to reduce some of the obstructions. From this, it could be seen that the mysterious beginning mirror painting was not completely flawless. There was no perfect thing in the world. However, there were risks here as well. If he were to fail this time, the other party would discover his true methods and be on guard against him. At that time, it would be even more difficult for him to succeed. Thus, he changed his mind and decided to wait for his yuan qi to recover a little before making his move. By doing this, he had to leave some leeway in case of unforeseen events. Another reason was to be on guard against the other party's strange and unpredictable methods at all times. This time, he did not choose to stand his ground here. Instead, he gave up on this formation and retreated to the second formation. This retreat was his initiative. It could be said that he was retreating in order to advance. The goal was to accumulate strength so that it would be easier for him to attack the next time. It was as if he was preparing his fist and waiting for the next attack. Lu Li suddenly realized that Zhang Yan's aura had disappeared from the formation. He thought for a moment and immediately understood why. Just now, he had been killed in an instant. He could not figure out what method it was. Although it was extremely frightening, he knew that even using the foundation curse had to pay a huge price. It was impossible for such a killing move to be unaffected. If it wasn't that he had used up a lot of yuan qi, then there was some kind of blockage somewhere. Moreover, even if it was a trap, he was not afraid. With the mysterious beginning mirror painting, so what if the other party killed him again? As for the consumption of yuan qi, that was the least of his worries. He and the other 3 were studying the same scripture together. They all relied on it. In times of crisis, they could still borrow yuan qi from each other. If one person was not enough, they could borrow from others. Even though they were not of the same body, they shared weal and woe. Also, it was not that they did nothing in the past million years. They clearly knew that using Dao artifacts consumed a lot of yuan qi. This was a huge shortcoming. Therefore, they gathered many precious materials from Bu Su Tian and used them to refine a 9 revolutions green venerable. By bathing in its flow, they could recover yuan qi quickly. Even if it did not work, they could borrow from the future and repay the price after the deed was done. In this way, he believed that he would not lose to the other party in this aspect. He did not rush to catch up. Instead, he operated the imperial seal of Xian Yuan and turned the formation around him into his own. He protected this path of retreat before he moved forward. Zhang Yan suddenly felt that he could no longer operate the first formation. He knew that the place had been forcefully taken away by Lu Yong's imperial seal. However, this was not a big deal. As long as he could get the treasure, then he could return everything that he had lost. At that time, he could even block off the other party's path of retreat. Therefore, he was not moved. He stood in the second formation and waited silently. At this moment, he heard Dan Yi's voice, "Friend Zhang, do you need our help?" The three saw that after Zhang Yan used his killer move, he was not able to kill Lu Li. Instead, he consumed a lot of yuan qi. Now that he was retreating, they were worried that he could not handle it alone. Therefore, they asked. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Don't worry. I can handle it. Friends, don't worry." The three saw that he was calm. It was obvious that he still had some tricks up his sleeves. Although they did not know what he was going to do, they knew that he would not boast. Therefore, for the time being, they did not make any moves. However, they were still secretly prepared. If there was a change in the situation, they could help in time. At this moment, Lu Li also stepped into the second formation. He found that it was exactly the same as the previous one. However, he did not have the patience to break the formation just now. He just released the imperial seal of Xian Yuan and sacrificed it in the sky. At the same time, he did not relax his attacks. He kept chanting spells and chased after Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan, on the other hand, was washing away the foul air in the lotus cup. At the same time, he calmed his mind and did not let the spell invade. As for the formation, he let it clean up. He did not go forward to stop it. He continued to retreat steadily. Soon, he was in the third formation. Lu Li noticed that he did not panic when he retreated. He was very calm. He guessed that he must have some kind of plan. However, he did not care about this. In the beginning, he did not want to reveal his true strength. He was cautious. But now that the painting of mysterious beginning had been exposed, there was no need to hide it anymore. Not long after, he took the second formation into his palm. After cleaning up his qi, he continued to step into the next formation. Zhang Yan did not give in on the third formation. Instead, he took advantage of the opportunity just now to make some arrangements here. Because he also realized that the innate imperial seal could change the masters of the array formations, but the time it took was different depending on the array formations. The first array formation took a long time to be dissolved due to the fact that he had stacked another array formation with more changes. The second array formation was quickly dissolved because he did not tamper with it. Now, the formation was still the same, but the complexity had increased by an entire level. This way, he could buy more time to recover his vitality. After Lu Li entered, he also noticed that something had changed here. However, to him, it was just a slight delay. The result would not change, so he still imprinted on it. After a period of time, he seized the formation. Next, he advanced step by step, while Zhang Yan retreated at a moderate pace. He only stopped when he reached the fifth formation. There was no way to retreat anymore. Michihito Ichido's formation had not been completely set up, and the suppression treasure had not been refined. In other words, if this place could not withstand it, then it would be completely broken through. Fortunately, his vitality had already recovered to its peak, so he took out the God-dashing Heaven Scroll from his sleeve. If he relied on himself to seize the Tao artifact, he might not be able to obtain it. Because no matter what, Lu Li was the master after all. With a single sense, he could take it away. If he failed this time, then there would be no more chances. In order to do it safely, he still needed to rely on this treasure flag. This item could disturb the connection between the master and the artifact, so as long as there was a moment of gap, he would be able to intercept it. Thus, he sorted out his qi and focused his gaze on Lu Li's figure. At the same time, he used his mind to calculate the location of Lu Li's body, and almost immediately felt a resistance. This time, although he did not have the help of the heaven-melding snake hoop, he managed to do the best he could. Almost instantly, he mobilized most of his transcendence energy. The barrier in front of him shattered like a thin wall under this vast power. In an instant, he charged into the other party's primordial chi sea. With a spray of golden light, he slashed it apart with a loud bang. He knew that the other party would come back to life in the next moment, and he only had a short moment of opportunity, so he immediately mobilized his magic power and used the god-dashing heaven scroll. In the void, a banner suddenly fluttered, covering the whole universe, blocking out the spiritual light, as if all the chi activity was blocked by it, and could not be operated. At this moment, the imperial seal of Xian Yuan was not controlled by its master, and at this moment, its connection was also cut off, so it only paused in the air. Zhang Yan waved his sleeve, and was about to roll it over. The treasure struggled once out of instinct, but without a master, how could it resist his unpredictable magic power? It only paused for a moment, and then turned into a clear light and fell into his hand. Then, he immediately transferred his own chi activity into it, driving away the original chi left by Lu Li. Lu Li only felt dizzy, and did not know where to go. When he came to, he realized that he had been killed again. At the same time of surprise, he was even more vigilant. The other party could actually kill him twice in a short period of time, and at this moment, he also realized that something was wrong. The imperial seal of Xian Yuan had actually lost connection with him, and with just a thought, he knew that it had most likely fallen into the hands of the other party. He also realized that something was wrong. Now that he was already deep in the enemy's territory, if the other party turned around and used the treasure against him, he might be able to trap him here. Although he might not be able to do anything to him, he would definitely be able to use this to continuously consume his chi. Foreseeing this unfavorable situation, he did not hesitate to retreat, but it was already too late. Suddenly, there was a flash of light, and a square seal had already leaped into the sky. Chapter 1701. After Zhang Yan used the imperial seal of Xian Yuan, he found that the circulation of his magic power and the casting of spells became incomparably smooth. Even the recovery of his energy seemed to have faintly increased. He could also feel that the longer this treasure was used, the greater the benefits the master would gain. Under the power of this treasure, all things could only obey its nature. This could be said in one sentence, and that was, the strong become stronger, the weak become weaker. It was fortunate that he had taken the treasure. If this dragged on, even if the heaven-combining snake hoop could be used again, under its influence, he might not be able to kill Lu Li so easily. The only pity was that he had just obtained this treasure and had not refined it yet. As a result, many of the benefits were taken away by the treasure itself, and there was not much that landed on him. But no matter what, with this item in hand, he had immediately turned the situation around. At this moment, whether to advance or retreat, it was all within his control, and he was no longer restricted by the enemy. At this moment, Lu Li stood in the formation, his body glowing. He chanted scriptures, and the page in his divine will faintly glowed, using this to resist the omnipresent pressure outside. Right now, he had no way to retreat, because the formation was originally obtained by borrowing the imperial seal of Xian Yuan. Once this treasure was in Zhang Yan's hands, the right to control it was naturally taken along with it. In other words, he was already trapped here. Next, he had to either defeat the opponent in front of him, or think of a way to retreat. If he could not do either, then he could only hope that his energy was enough to last until the battle ended and Bai Wei and the others came to his rescue. Because he had already used the 3 great curses he knew, they were not able to do anything to the opponent. Right now, the only thing that could succeed was the fundamental curse. But after thinking about it, he finally decided to suppress it. The 4 great fundamental curses were divided into the 4 branches of hang, stop, transform, and purify. The one he knew was the purify curse, and although its killing power was not weak, it was a level lower than the transform curse. Even if it landed, it could not immediately do anything to the opponent, so this path could not be taken. When he thought of this, he felt slightly helpless. His purpose for coming here was to disrupt the human Dao Yuanzun's arrangements, but he did not expect the other party's methods to be unexpectedly brilliant. Not only did they block him here, they even took away a Dao artifact. In reality, at this point, he could no longer achieve his original goal. He could only try to protect himself and see if there was a chance for him to retreat. Dan Yi and the other two had been paying close attention to the battle, and when they saw Zhang Yan snatching the imperial edict of Xian Yuan into his hands and turning the situation around, trapping the enemy in the formation, they were greatly inspired. Michihito Ichido praised him several times. If they were to ignore the Tai golden bead, the reason why they were inferior to the Khanate demon was undoubtedly because of the Dao artifact. Now that they had won, although it didn't mean that they had a chance of winning, they at least had some confidence. Actually, all of them were clearly aware that according to normal circumstances, they would probably lose this battle. However, they had no choice but to do this, because if they missed this opportunity, then their chances of turning the situation around in the future would be even slimmer. However, Zhang Yan's actions made them see some hope. Dan Yi said, "With fellow Daoist Zhang here, there's nothing to worry about in the outside world. It's just that we don't know when the three demons will arrive. We should refine the formation's magic treasure as soon as possible to deal with them." Michihito Ichido also said, "That's right, there is still a great enemy behind us. Daoist Zhang, there is no way out now. We need to quickly set up the second formation to prevent any unforeseen events." Fu Qingming pondered and said, "Although the 5 arrays from before were simple to set up, it seems like they are really useful. At the very least, they managed to delay that demon. After the Dharma treasures here are refined, I can set up a few more outside." The other two nodded in agreement. At this moment, Zhang Yan was constantly visualizing the sword light in his spirit. Under the illumination of the seal's spiritual light, the flying sword slashed and slashed as he wished. After using it many times, he even gained some enlightenment. However, the opponent in front of him was the complete opposite. Compared to before, he was much slower and always looked like he was a beat slower. This was because he had to use a part of his strength to defend against the Dharma treasure that was hanging above him. However, he realized that the chi activity of this guy did not decrease at all. It was obvious that killing him twice was far from his limit. He laughed lightly. It was rare to have such an opponent as a sparring partner. It was a good chance for him to test out his skills. Even if his vitality was really inexhaustible and he could not kill him, he had achieved his goal of delaying the battle. Not long after, Luli found that it was getting more and more difficult to deal with. He knew that staying here would not only put him at a disadvantage, but he would also not be able to pressure his opponent. Therefore, he began to look for ways to retreat. He kept creating clones of his mind to calculate a way out of the formation. However, every time they appeared, they would be killed by a ray of sword light. However, even if they only appeared for a moment, they would help him in his calculations. At the very least, it would consume some of his vitality. As for using insects to break the formation, with the seal above him, even if he released them, they wouldn't listen to him, so he decided not to use them. Soon, 2 years passed while the two sides were fighting. In the depths of the inner realm, the elephant dragon gold furnace in front of Dan Yi and the other two suddenly shook. Smoke spewed out and rays of colorful light flew out. In the end, it became a colorful ball of light that was extremely dazzling. Michihito Ichido reached out and took it. To his surprise, he felt that it was a bit heavy. He couldn't help but feel happy and said, "It's done." In fact, at the realm of true yang, no matter what it was in his hand, it would not feel heavy. However, it could make him feel heavy. This was because he had broken away from a certain kind of restraint. It was a restraint of its own, and it was not affected by the aura of the three of them. This thing was not a treasure, but it could be used to stabilize the formation. He took it and looked at it several times until he was sure that there were no flaws in it. Then he said, "I didn't wait in vain." Dan Yi said, "Brother Yi, why don't you go ahead and set it up first? We will come after we refine our artifacts." Because the sacrificial refinement was not a magical treasure used for battle, the golden furnace was currently refining several objects together. However, it was not without an upper limit. This treasure had 8 mouths, each facing different directions. This meant that it could refine a maximum of 8 objects at the same time. Daoist nodded solemnly, then cupped his fists and said, "I'll be going first." He changed his mind, and in an instant, he came to an empty space. He saw tens of thousands of stars flashing around him, and they were arranged neatly. This formation had been arranged long ago. Now, it was just lacking a treasure to suppress it. He threw the ball of light out. Immediately, there was a chi dynamic that affected the stars. Every star was originally independent, but when the chi landed, they connected with each other and became a whole. He urged in his heart again, and the formation immediately started to move. At the same time, it produced waves of invisible wali that shook the void. At this moment, this formation could be considered complete just now. He glanced outside and saw that Zhang Yan could handle the situation there. Even if he went up, he wouldn't be of much help. He might as well make use of the time he had to set up a few more formations to fight against the demons that were about to arrive. With this thought in mind, he sent a message to the 3 of them with his divine will and flew into the sky again. In the formation, Zhang Yan's body was surrounded by mysterious light. There were countless rays of sword light flying around, constantly slashing at Lu Li's Dharmakaya. However, the latter had used his own foundation to vaguely find the way out in the past few years. During this period of time, he naturally could not let the other party plot against him, so he changed the formation every time. It was quite impressive that the demon could still find the right way under such circumstances. Until now, including the previous 2 times, he had killed this demon no less than 7 times. However, after each time, the demon would immediately return, and it was full of vitality, seemingly unharmed. However, he did not stop because of this. Instead, he used this opportunity to understand the changes in the Dharma. As he killed this demon over and over again, his understanding of this secret method was improving at an unimaginable speed. Since the beginning of the world, there was probably no true yang cultivator who had been killed so many times by his peers. Even the mighty who possessed the mysterious painting back then had never experienced such an experience. He was using this demon as a test to complete his Dharma. On Lu Li's side, he was also learning something in the cycle of life and death. However, there was one difference. Every time he turned back, that part of his consciousness would disappear along with his body. This meant that that part of his existence was completely gone. Therefore, as long as the mysterious painting was with him, he could not transcend it and understand the true consciousness. Although he felt that he had gained something, in the end, he still gained nothing. In fact, if it was just his own vitality, it would probably be exhausted after being killed 2 or 3 times. However, there was the endless vitality of Bai Wei and the other 2 outside. Not only that, there was also the contribution of the 9 transformations Green Reverend, so he did not have to worry about the lack of vitality. This was because the 3 of them had given him some of their own vitality. However, because it was constantly recovering, the loss of vitality was actually not as much as he had imagined. If this situation did not change, then it would not be a problem for him to hold on for dozens or even hundreds of years. At this moment, Lu Li suddenly opened his eyes. Finally, he found the path in the formation. Without any hesitation, he made up his mind and dashed towards that direction. In an instant, he landed in the 4th formation. However, at this moment, countless rays of sword light pierced into his Dharma body and were cutting away at his vitality. It was different from what he saw at the beginning. The rays of sword light were sharper and more difficult to deal with. He could feel that, in the non-stop sparring, Zhang Yan's strength was continuously increasing, and he was becoming more and more skilled in the battle. However, what was more troublesome was that imperial seal of Xian Yuan. This item was weakening his chi at every moment. Although it was only a tiny bit and did not affect him much, but when fighting against someone of the same generation, even the slightest bit of disharmony could cause a great deviation. Therefore, after thinking about it, it was already very difficult for him to turn the situation around. The only thing he could do was to endure these dozens of years until Bai Wei and the others arrived. Just now, he could break out of this situation. Chapter 1702. The battle between Zhang Yan and Lu Li went on without rest. Before they knew it, dozens of years had passed. Dan Yi and the others also made use of the time he had won to use all methods to refine artifacts and set up restrictive formations. Compared to how it was in the beginning, it could be said that the world had changed drastically. However, as long as all the demons did not arrive together, they would not stop. They would continue to set up. However, a few years ago, they felt two shaken senses in succession. They knew that two Yuan Zun had died one after another. At this moment, only the last Yuan Zun was holding on by himself. However, with his strength alone, it was obvious that he could not hold on for much longer. Danger was coming. At this moment, Lu Li had already retreated to the first formation. He thought that he should be able to escape very quickly, but in the last formation, he could not find the correct way out no matter what. This was because every time he calculated the path, there would always be some inexplicable changes in the formation. He guessed that this was probably not just because his opponents kept changing formations. Perhaps it was also because of the influence of the imperial seal of Xian Yuan, causing his calculations to be slightly off. That was why it was difficult for him to do as he wished. While he was still calculating, he suddenly felt something in his heart. His eyes lit up, and his expression became slightly more relaxed. He raised his head and said, "Fellow Taoist, we've been fighting for a long time, but you can't kill me. Why don't you stop and listen to what I have to say?" Zhang Yan's eyes were cold. Just now, he also felt that if there were no accidents, it should be the last human Dao Yuan Zun who had died. Needless to say, the three Khanate demons would definitely rush here after their battle there. However, they did not speak to this demon. They took out a spell and killed him again in an instant. In just a moment, Lu Li came back to life again. He shook his head and said, "Looks like someone else will have to speak to you." Zhang Yan's expression changed slightly. He did not attack again. Instead, he looked outside and saw a white-robed Taoist appear outside the formation. He sat on a five-tusked white elephant with golden threads circling his back. His sleeves fluttered like clouds, and he looked handsome. Lu Li said, "This is Heavenly Lord Guangsheng. He has cultivated for the longest time among us, and his cultivation is also the highest." The white-robed Taoist smiled and said, "In front of everyone's human Dao Yuan Zun, there is no need to mention the name of Heavenly Lord." He bowed to Zhang Yan and said, "My name is Bai Wei. May I ask how I should address you, my friend?" After observing for a moment, Zhang Yan could sense that this person did not have any aura. At this moment, the one standing there was only a shadow, and not a clone or the main body. Dan Yi's voice sounded in his ears. "Why don't you listen to what this demon has to say first? If he can buy us some time, we can make more arrangements." Zhang Yan pondered for a moment. Then, with a move of his qi, an avatar appeared outside the formation. He even bowed and said, "I Zhang Yan, what do you have to say?" Because Bai Wei and the others were connected to Lu Li's divine will, they could have known what was happening here. However, they were trapped by Qin Chan's art of obscurity, and their senses could not reach the outside world. Only after killing Lu Lin and the other three and breaking out of the technique did they understand the whole story. The three of them were also very wary of Zhang Yan's ability to kill a true young mighty figure in an instant. After all, there was only one mysterious beginning Yang mirror painting, and they were not Lu Li. If they were killed, there was no way for them to come back. However, it was not difficult for them to determine that this technique was related to qi. If the two sides had never come into contact, it would be impossible. Otherwise, Zhang Yan could have found them and killed them from a distance. After discussing, they believed that as long as they concealed themselves, they would be fine. Of course, if they were to fight face to face, they would definitely be exposed, and they could only rely on their own secret techniques to evade. Because their previous evasive techniques had been proven useless, they prepared to deduce a few techniques and only attacked when they were prepared. Therefore, they did not attack immediately. At this time, Bai Wei's avatar came ahead of time, but he had another intention. He said, "As far as I know, you seem to have another inheritance and did not cultivate in Busu heaven. Why do you need to stand up for those cultivators in Busu heaven?" Zhang Yan replied in a serious tone, "Although I did not cultivate in Busu heaven, I am still a cultivator of humanity. I have inherited the supreme techniques, and I also have disciples, teachers, and friends. If you want to destroy my humanity, how can I stand aside and do nothing?" Bai smiled and said, "You are too stubborn." He pointed to his chest and said, "Humanity and other Taoists are all determined by my heart. It is not that demons cannot be humans, it is not that demons do not need to be humans. If you are willing to retreat, I can make the decision today. I will not make things difficult for any of your disciples. I only need you to study the profound principles and recite the true techniques together with me." Zhang Yan said indifferently, "Listening to your words, it seems that you have already won this battle." Bai smiled and said, "We have the primordial cardinal treasure, Tai Golden Pearl, in our hands. It is impossible for us to lose. Lu, Yuan Zun, and the other two's cultivation and mana are not below yours and the other exalted ones. But now that they are dead, why do you still want to get involved with them?" Zhang Yan's gaze became deeper and said, "Since you are a villain of humanity, why are you saying this to I?" Bai Wei said, "I and Busu Heaven and the original Yuan Zun have been at odds for a long time. I can no longer let go of the past grudges. Naturally, I should settle the karma in this changing world. Since you and I have no grudges, why do we need to fight? If we can avoid a dispute, it will be a happy ending for everyone." Although they deeply hated the cultivators of humanity for cutting off their path of advancement, no matter what, they had all cultivated under a powerful person of humanity. This was something that could not be washed away. Therefore, if they did not kill humanity and cut off the karma, it would be difficult to establish the fundamental sutra in the future. Moreover, Zhang Yan did not cultivate under Busu heaven. Moreover, they had deduced that this person had nothing to do with the Yuan Zun of humanity they knew in the past. Most importantly, Zhang Yan's combat ability was strong, and his method of killing Jin Yang was even more mysterious. Even if they had the confidence to win, they would probably have to pay a huge price. It would be best if they could reason with him and rope him in. As long as Zhang Yan was willing to give up his original cultivation method and even give up his identity as a cultivator of humanity to study the fundamental sutra, then they would be happy to accept. After all, the fundamental sutra would be comprehended by another powerful person, and it would be closer to the path. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed and he said, "I wonder what method you are talking about." Bai Wei smiled and said, "I have the supreme fundamental sutra, it is called the Fundamental Sutra. This method can be used to comprehend the path and the mysteries. If you are really interested, I can take it out right now and let you read it." Zhang Yan made an "oh" sound and said, "Can I browse through it without entering your sect's walls?" Bai Wei bowed and sighed. "In the past, when we cultivated, there were obstacles and we deeply felt that cultivation was not easy. The cultivators of the upper realm all treasured the secret method and were not willing to teach it easily. As a result, the people of the world could not enter the door of Tao. Therefore, when we achieved success, we made a wish that we should build a wonderful realm in Busu heaven. If the people of the world entered our Tao, they would be able to see all the methods and obtain all kinds of fate." Although his voice was calm, as he spoke, it gradually became louder and louder. It shook people's hearts, as if there was great mana contained in it. Within the primordial sea in the void, it was unknown how many living beings heard this and they all bowed and kowtowed. Their hearts trembled and they shed tears of gratitude. Zhang Yan looked on coldly and did not stop him. Influencing all living beings was just a small Tao, but he could discern the true intention from this, and this was also what the other party wanted him to see. Bai Wei flipped his wrist and a golden page appeared in his hand. He said seriously, "If you are willing to come over, you will naturally not be wrong to be under us. You will naturally be on the same level as the four of us and have the same name for all ages. In the future, if you can open another fundamental sutra, you will be given a title, set up a Tao altar, and start a sect." As he spoke, he pushed outwards and the golden page floated over. He was not afraid that Zhang Yan would know what was written on it. Giving the scripture to others to read was also a method of enlightenment. The more one wanted to find a way to restrain them, the deeper one would sink into it. This was because when you do such a thing, you must have already acknowledged the method. If you didn't acknowledge it, then there was no point in talking about it. However, merely reading the incantations on the scriptures was useless. This required perseverance in visualization and constant chanting. Only by harmonizing with the divine will and heart consciousness would one be able to display its power. This was not something that could be achieved in a hurry. Also, this Tao method was created by the four of them. From this point of view, it was impossible for someone to use this method to defeat them. Instead, they hoped that someone would use this method to enter the Tao. Zhang Yan saw the golden page arrive before him, but he didn't even look at it. He waved his sleeve and threw it to the side, revealing a decisive look. Bai Wei's expression didn't change. He only regretfully said, "Since you are unwilling, then we can only fight." After he finished speaking, he bowed and disappeared. Zhang Yan didn't pay any attention to him. He was still trapped here, and with a thought, he sent an avatar into the depths of the inner realm. Dan Yi and the other two stood there, their expressions incomparably solemn. Zhang Yan raised his eyes and said, "Fellow Taoists, you must have heard my conversation with Bai Wei. He will arrive shortly." Michihito Ichido coldly said, "We have been waiting for them for a long time." Danny nodded and said, "Lu Lin and the others have already entered meditation. Only a few of us are left. No matter what, we must protect the human Tao." Fu Qingming pondered a bit and said, "Everyone, if this battle is disadvantageous, I can stay behind to cover the retreat." He had the body of a Tao god. As long as his possession method wasn't destroyed, he couldn't be killed. At most, he could only be suppressed. Of course, this was dangerous. If everyone asked him, he might not be able to protect himself. If he was still in the enemy's hands, then there would be no chance of survival. Zhang Yan waved his hand instead to draw the victorious heavenly vessel over, and he said, "This vessel was refined from the unfettered wood that I obtained by chance, and it's capable of traversing space and avoiding tribulations. Everyone can plant a strand of vital energy within it, and if it's at the last moment, all of you can ride this vessel to flee into space and wait for an opportunity." They had made all the preparations they could, but aside from the Tao treasure, the demons also had the Tai golden bead. No one knew what the battle would be like, so they could only prepare for the worst. As the four of them spoke, they suddenly heard rumbling outside. The void trembled and the world changed colors. The four of them knew that this person had arrived. Chapter 1703. Just as heaven and earth were shaking, there was a flash of light in the sky. Suddenly, something fell from the sky, and as if it had identified the direction, it fell towards the formation below. The four people in the formation saw clearly that it was the spiritual world Rui. Dan Yi's spirit was lifted, and he looked at Zhang Yan. "Among us, fellow Taoist Zhang has the highest spiritual power, so please take it." Zhang Yan didn't decline. With a thought, he used his qi to guide it, and the treasure was very obedient. It immediately turned into a spiritual rainbow and flew into his hand. He picked it up and saw that it was a warm jade Rui. The head was raised with cloud patterns, and the neck was like a goose's neck. From head to tail, it was about the length of half an arm. At the end of the handle, there was a red tassel, and it was tied with a string of colorful jade beads. When he held it in his hand, there was a dense mist around it, and there was the sound of the beads touching each other. Danny transmitted a message with his spirit, "This treasure changes according to the person. It is said that only the person who truly wields it can see its true appearance." Michihito Ichido was surprised, "There is someone who truly wields this treasure?" Danny wasn't sure, "It is only a rumor," but the person who wielded this treasure didn't deny this rumor. Zhang Yan could feel that this treasure was probably the easiest Tao tool to control. It didn't need anyone to refine it, and the moment his qi entered it, it would be smooth and unimpeded. However, he also knew that it was extremely difficult to control this treasure well. If one's wish was too great, then the treasure would ignore one and one's origin chi would be wasted for nothing. However, if one's wish was too small, then even if it could be achieved, the effect would be limited. Wasting one's origin chi was still a small matter. Not only would one not be able to achieve one's goal, but one would also have to return the treasure to the opponent. That would not be worth it. Therefore, to use it well, one had to grasp this line. Before this, they had already agreed on how to use this treasure, but when they actually took it, they had a different feeling. He raised his head and said, "Everyone, I think that if we use the method we discussed earlier, we might not be able to get what we want." Danny hurriedly asked, "Did you sense something?" Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, "We might have misunderstood earlier. This treasure can be entrusted with the power of will, but it doesn't just depend on the size of the matter, it also depends on the direction of the person's heart. We have discussed this for a long time, and our hearts are filled with anticipation. It can be said that we have put too much effort into it. If we entrust it with the power of will, there is an 80 to 90% chance that it will not work." The three of them were stunned. Obviously, they hadn't expected that there was actually such a reason. In fact, they'd prepared a few methods to deal with different situations, but it seemed like none of them would work. Michihito Ichido asked, "Then what do you think we should do?" Zhang Yan pondered for a while. It turned out that what they lacked was a treasure that could suppress the formation, so they wanted to use it to make a wish. Since that didn't work, then they could only try another way. He said, "Since there's no way to suppress the formation, then we can make a wish. We just need to disturb the other party's chi activity. This will also achieve our goal, and it's not a big wish." The three of them discussed for a while and felt that this suggestion was acceptable. Danny said, "But Taoist friend, you can take a step back first. If I touch this item, it will definitely fall into the hands of the demons, and they will use it against us. Since we can't gain much from it now, then we'd rather hold it in our hands and observe the situation." Zhang Yan agreed with this. Seeing the enemy's methods before making arrangements was also a good way to deal with it. Moreover, it wasn't like they didn't have the power to fight back now. At least they still had the imperial seal of first origin that they could use. Once this was settled, the four of them retreated from the spirit's will. Just now, they had a lot to talk about, but in the outside world, only a moment had passed. At this moment, the region was shaking even more violently. It was a sign that a great whaley was about to arrive. After a short while, a brilliant golden light that almost covered the entire world descended. Its speed wasn't fast, but wherever it passed, everything seemed to be merged into it and disappeared. Zhang Yan could sense that this light was formed by an incantation, but it wasn't like Bai Wei's so-called fundamental incantation. It was just that the power contained in it was immense. However, no matter how much more powerful this mana was, the four of them would be able to withstand it. Whether this was a show of force or some other purpose, they still couldn't see it clearly. However, there might be some hidden tricks in it. Therefore, after thinking about it, they didn't take it head-on, but decided to activate the formation to receive it. This way, the formation might be slightly exposed, but they could avoid direct contact. Even if there was anything, there would be room to turn things around. He discussed with the three of them in the spirit's will, and they decided to activate the 5 formations in front of them to receive this collision. Now, the 5 formations were not the same as when he first set them up. After repeated battles with Lu Li, they had already changed. Not only did they conceal their own chi activity, but they also had the imperial seal of first origin on them. Their endurance was not just a little bit stronger. The 5 formations were activated at the same time. As the golden light shone in, it was moved into the void layer by layer, and nothing else was damaged. Lu Li had been trapped here all this time. Seeing that the formation only cared about external forces, there seemed to be a loophole to exploit. He wanted to take this chance to get out, but after talking with the three of them in the spirit's will, he stayed in the formation. Zhang Yan's eyes flickered. He saw everything this person did. Because he couldn't really kill this person, he purposely opened the door just now to see what choice he would make. But he could leave, but he acted as if he didn't see anything. From this, it could be seen that the three demons had some kind of plan, and they wanted to achieve it through Luli. The golden light couldn't break through the 5 gates, and after a long time, it retracted. However, after a moment, the 4 of them suddenly felt that the world shook. This was not the place where they were standing, but the entire void seemed to be shaking. Then, a yellow-skinned gourd appeared in the void, reflecting the beauty of mountains and rivers, the essence of all living things. It was like a painting in thick ink, but also like it was created naturally. It was glossy and glistening, rippling shadows. A leaf hung down from the stem, like a crown, swaying there, and there was a thumping sound that penetrated into their hearts. Michihito Ichido had been standing in the star formation that he had set up, ready to make a second layer of protection if something went wrong. At this moment, when he saw this item, he recognized that it was the heaven and earth upside-down gourd. At this moment, the coiling throat in his hand trembled faintly, and he knew that something was wrong. At this moment, he didn't dare to care about his mana, and hurriedly picked up the treasure to calculate. The result made his expression change, and he said with a thought, "Quick, everyone must think of a way to withstand the power of this magic treasure." The 3 of them could feel the anxious thought transmitted from him. Without hesitation, Zhang Yan immediately activated the glazed lotus cup, and placed it above the formation. Dan Yi also activated the natural golden lotus, just in case. Fu Qingming also held an item in his hand, but it looked blurry and difficult to identify. The gourd only shook there a few times, and everyone actually felt the world was spinning, and the qi in their body seemed to be stagnant for a while, and the next moment, it became scattered in all directions, as if it was no longer under their control. Zhang Yan steadied his mind to resist this power, and quickly stabilized his qi. At the same time, he could see that the glazed lotus petal was slowly dyed with a layer of murky black, and it occupied the empty space at an unprecedented speed. He glanced at the yellow-skinned gourd, and at this moment, he couldn't see its master, and only the power of the Tao instrument came through the air, and it couldn't accurately land on one person. The power was destined to be scattered, and so what they experienced at this moment was only the remnant power. But don't forget that there was actually a part of the power that was blocked by the glazed lotus cup, and so it seemed that the power of this treasure was unexpectedly strong. At this moment, Michihito Ichido also reminded, with the coiling throat, "I can roughly guess that this person hasn't pushed the power of this treasure to the extreme, so we must be careful later." Fu Qingming looked at the sky, and thought for a while before saying, "It seems that the power of the demon is above our deduction." Dan Yi's expression was firm, and he said, "We have prepared for a long time just to fight with this person. If we can't even survive this round, then we can forget about defeating the enemy." Zhang Yan sensed for a moment, but he couldn't sense the people's qi. It was obvious that the few demons weren't here, and only this Tao instrument was thrown over. However, this Tao instrument was different from the imperial seal of Xian Yuan. It had been refined for a long time, and their minds were already connected, so it was impossible for them to snatch it. He thought to himself, this person didn't appear at this moment, probably because he was guarding against his art of killing. If it was a normal battle, he could still take the initiative to go up to them, but at this moment, to defend against the Tao instrument, he could only stand in the formation and wait for them to come up to him. The truth was, as he guessed, the 3 Khanate demons were worried about his art of killing, and were afraid that their qi would be exposed, so they hid at the side, and didn't appear in front of the formation. They only controlled the Tao instrument from afar, and this was both a test and a pressure. Dai Gong said, "Guangxing Heavenly Lord, this person seems to have dealt with it." Bai Wei said casually, "We haven't caught the qi of the people Dao Yuan Zun, and we don't know where he is, so we can't take him down easily." Dai Gong said, "Then it's up to Heavenly Venerable Zhiguan. I've already told him the method of evading that I deduced. If we can lure that Daoist Zhang to use that killing method, even if we can't evade it, we can still find a way." Back then, when Zhang Yan used that technique, they were unable to sense it within the art of fusion, so they did not know exactly what technique it was. Now that they had come out, if they could observe it once, they would be able to find the method to break it. Bai Wei shook his head, that Daoist Zhang might not fall for it, just now that we used the golden sun incantation to enter, but he didn't leak any qi, so I can't find his exact location. This shows how cautious he is, so we don't have to count on it. Dai Gong said, Guangxing Heavenly Lord, what do you want to do? Bai Wei looked at the heaven and earth upside-down gourd, and his eyes shone brightly, and he said confidently, we have the Tao instrument in our hands, so it's enough. 1,000,000 years ago, when this treasure fell into his hands, he could only use it roughly, but unexpectedly, this treasure was very compatible with him, and after the battle with Lu Lin and the others just now, he gained even more, and he almost dug out all the potential in it. Not only him, but the others also felt the same. He said, Chingon Heavenly Lord, it's time for you to make your move. Dai Gong nodded, and with a shake of his sleeve, spiritual light appeared, and a long bell sound echoed in the void. Chapter 1704. The 4 people in the formation also heard the sound of the bell. It felt as if the sound came from the 9 heavens, and even through the formation, it was extremely clear. Zhang Yan looked up and saw a golden bell hanging in the sky. The top of the bell was connected to the blue sky, and the bottom covered the dark sky. The bell wall was engraved with the images of all things, and around the rim of the bell, there were auspicious clouds, and auspicious mist. When Dan Yi saw this item, he immediately warned, everyone, this is the Lu Yuan golden bell. Once the bell rings, our auras need to move according to it. If we go against it, it will immediately catch our auras and suppress us. You must be careful. He had already told everyone about the power of this magic treasure, but he had only heard about its general power. This was the first time he had experienced it, so out of caution, he specially warned them. Zhang Yan steadied his mind. He could feel that as the sound rang out, the aura of this treasure burst forth, and at the same time, a unique rhythm appeared. In just a few breaths of time, it changed over a dozen times. Sometimes it was gentle, sometimes it was gentle, sometimes it was grand, sometimes it was surging, sometimes it was high, sometimes it was low, and so on and so forth. It was like a tune, but hidden within it was endless killing intent. He circulated his own aura and followed it. Although there were many changes, he did not make a single mistake. But he knew that he could endure it now, but it would be different when he was in battle. Think about it. You were clearly on the offensive, but the bell told you to be quiet and not to act rashly, so you could only endure it. You were clearly trying to defend, but the bell told you to attack, so you had to fight with your life on the line. This put you in an extremely passive position. Fortunately, the sound did not distinguish between friend and foe. The master also had to follow it, or else he would be suppressed by the treasure. But there was one thing that the master would know in advance what would happen. This was actually according to his thoughts, and if he could be a step ahead and be prepared, he would always be able to take the initiative. At this moment, he looked elsewhere and saw that Dan Yi and the other 2 had serious expressions. If they were only facing one magic treasure alone, as long as they focused, it would not be difficult for a true yang cultivator. However, one had to know that at this moment, they were still under the envelopment of the heaven and earth upside-down gourd. It would be difficult for them to prevent their origin chi from being affected by the gourd and to follow the sound of the alloy bell. Not to mention that the other party had not fully activated the power of the magic treasure. One could imagine that they had to endure for a long time without any mistakes. This was undoubtedly a test for them. After Fu Qingming held on for a long time, he frowned. He had the body of a Tao god, so he wasn't afraid of most other treasures. However, if he wasn't careful and didn't conform to the sound of the bell, he might be suppressed. Hence, he was especially afraid of this treasure. As Danny adjusted his essence, he said, the person behind the scenes has not appeared, but we can still withstand this kind of attack for the time being. I am afraid that there will be more variables here. Michihito Ichido held the disc and calculated, then shook his head and said, now that the universe has been turned upside down, the heavenly secrets are dark and unclear, the future is already difficult to predict, but it is not that we have no way to deal with it. I can use the Rainbow Lotus Cup to help. If it is still not enough, we can still use the Spirit World Rui. Zhang Yan pondered for a moment, but did not agree. He said, that's not appropriate. The other side should know that the spirit world Rui is in my hands, so it is impossible for them not to make preparations. They are probably waiting for me to take out this Tao artifact. We must not do what the opponent wants. Michihito Ichido asked, Fellow Zhang, do you have any ideas? Zhang Yan had another thought, and after a moment, he said, Everyone, please wait a moment, I might be able to give it a try. He recited the incantation in his heart, slowly washing away the turbid air in the glazed lotus flower cup. He did not care about the Luyuan golden bell, but focused on bearing the power of the heaven and earth inverted gourd, because this treasure could at most bear the pressure of one enchanted treasure at the same time, otherwise the turbid air would not be washed away in time. Other than this item, there were two other enchanted treasures here that could not be ignored. The primordial imperial seal could reduce the unfavorable situation, and the god-shaking heavenly scroll could even weaken the connection between the master and the enchanted treasure. As long as they were used, they could save the situation. Logically speaking, there were 4 of them here, so they could divide and control. However, there was a problem here. These few treasures had always been in his hands, and after tens of years of using them, he was already very familiar with them, and he even knew many of the key points. If he were to send them to the hands of Dan Yi and the rest, it would not be a problem under normal circumstances, but now under the influence of the bell, he still had to unleash the power of these enchanted treasures, so there might be some problems. After pondering for a while, he decided that it would be better for him to do this alone. Thus, with a thought, he instantly created several magic power clones. Each clone was holding a treasure, but he was controlling 3 treasures at the same time. Doing this consumed a lot of chi of vitality, but fortunately, he had a strong foundation, and was able to withstand it. There was still a problem here. The Tao treasures were not directly controlled by the original owner, so if the demon were to attack, there was a chance to snatch it away. However, he deliberately placed this flaw here. As long as this person dared to show himself, the chi dynamic would definitely be exposed, and then he could directly use the secret method to try and kill him. However, the 3 enchanted treasures hovered in the sky at the same time, and layers of clear light spread out, blocking the sound, shaking the spiritual vigor, and immediately alleviating the urgent situation. Dan Yi and the rest immediately felt the pressure on them lighten, and when they focused, they saw that Zhang Yan was controlling the 3 treasures, and each incarnation's chi dynamic changed according to the sound of the bell, displaying a very exquisite control of chi. They secretly praised, and temporarily put down the enchanted treasures in their hands, slightly adjusted their breathing, and prepared to provide support at the critical moment. The 3 fiendish demons had also sensed the changes here. Dai Gong looked from afar, and said playfully, Guangxing Heavenly Lord, the other party seems to be using a few enchanted treasures to block, but the spiritual light seems to be muddy, as if Master only used a layer of strength. Looking at this, isn't he afraid that we will snatch it away? Bai Wei said, perhaps this person wants me to do so. Dai Gong also nodded. Before he tested out the mysterious method, he would definitely not easily go forward. Bai Wei looked for a moment, and said, looking at the situation, although this person did not use all his strength, it doesn't look easy either. Miao Xing Heavenly Lord, Qing'an Heavenly Lord, we can use some more strength. Under this pressure, they will no longer have to worry about anything else, then it will be easier for Miao Xing Heavenly Lord to act. Qian Luo and Dai Gong both responded, and used their strength one after another, forcibly pulling the enchanted treasures up another layer. After the 2 sides began to collide, Lu Li stayed in the formation and did not go out. Although the heaven and earth upside-down gourd could avoid him under Qian Luo's instructions, LV Yuan and the golden bell also had to withstand it, and they also needed to adjust their chi from time to time. But overall, the pressure he felt was slightly less than Dan Yi and the rest. At this time, he received Bai Wei's message, and it was to try to enter the depths of the formation. It would be best if he directly fought with the 4 of them, causing them to reveal their chi dynamic, then the power of the enchanted treasures could directly fall on them. With a thought, he tried to enter the depths of the formation. At this time, Zhang Yan suddenly felt the pressure above him increase for a long time, and when he was about to add a bit more magic power, Michihito Ichido said, Fellow Taoist Zhang, I have come to help you. As he spoke, he took out the rainbow lotus cup that he had refined for a long time, and he had not used it all this time, and slightly weakened its power. Zhang Yan nodded slightly. Although he could still maintain the formation, the demons saw that they could not suppress them, and would soon use other methods, so he had to think of a way to break out of this situation. He thought for a while, and there was indeed a breakthrough point that he could use here. When he achieved true yang, there was once a Khanate demon that used an incarnation to fight with him, and he purposely lured it into the Qi Lu, and conveniently erased this memory. Later, when it was unprepared, he caught one of the demon's incarnations, and entered Bu Su Tian to find out the situation. He remembered this demon's qi. Previously, it was hiding in Bu Su Tian, and he could not come into contact with it. Now that he came out, if he could find another strand of it, he might be able to find the true body of this demon. However, this person was hiding, and he could not take the initiative to leave the formation to find it, so he could only lure the enemy in. He understood that this person did not come out because he was afraid of his killing method, but if he took the initiative to expose this secret method, then after these demons saw it and deduced a way to avoid it, it was very likely that they would join forces to kill him. It should be known that his current mystic art was very different from the one he had studied in the beginning. It could be said that it was a completely different Dharma art. He could first use the mystic art that he had learned and pretend to leak it. When the demons came to him, he could then use the mystic art that he had learned. If he had a chance to kill one of them, the remaining three would be much easier to deal with. Thinking of this, he turned to look at Lu Li. This person was an opportunity. These demons deliberately left him here, in fact, it was also a bait, and then he could push the boat with the current boat. Lu Li had been wandering in the formation for dozens of years, and could not be said to be very familiar with the formation, but in a situation where the formation did not actively change, it was not difficult for him to find the way in. Because there was no one presiding over the formation, it was very smooth this time. Soon, he passed 3 formations, and returned to the 5th formation. Here, he could feel that the enemy was close at hand. Zhang Yan had been paying attention to his movements, and seeing that the opportunity had come, he said, "Friends, I need to be distracted for a moment." Hearing this, Dan Yi knew that he must have a plan, and said, "Friend, if you have a plan, you can go ahead first. We can hold on here." Zhang Yan nodded, used the previous method, and calculated Lu Li's position. At the same time, the heavenly coalescing snake hoop also buzzed. After dozens of years, this treasure could be used again. At the same time, he carried an endless amount of Weili and broke into the person's essence sea. With a flash of golden light, he killed him again. The spirits of the Khanate demons were connected, and when Lu Li was killed, Bai Wei and the others immediately felt it and knew the reason. His expression was slightly shaken, and a strange light shone in his eyes. He said, "So it is this amazing method. It is not much different from my previous deduction. That priest Zhang only needs to find the cultivators back, and he can kill him. Although I do not know the profoundness, if he only needs to avoid the main body, it is not difficult." Chapter 1705. Although Bai Wei and the others had guessed Zhang Yan's method, it was just a guess after all. They couldn't find the exact direction, so they didn't dare to act rashly. Now that they saw it, all their doubts were gone. This kind of secret method always made people shrink back before they knew it, but once it was exposed, it wasn't hard for them to be on guard. Qian Luo, however, was suspicious. "I've never heard of this method before. It's so easily sensed by me. Could it be a formation masking it, leading me to misjudge?" Bai Wei pondered for a moment and said with certainty, "There's no outside interference, so it's undoubtedly the true method. The only thing to worry about is whether this person has other killing divine arts in his hands." Dai Gong didn't believe it and said, "Just this one divine art is already unheard of, let alone others." Bai Wei shook his head and said, "How can things in the world be fixed? Even if I have the upper hand, aren't I still trembling with fear like I'm walking on thin ice?" Dai Gong thought for a moment and said with pity, "It's a pity that this person isn't willing to join me. If I can grasp this kind of secret method, I can improve my foundation scripture by another level." Qian Luo said indifferently, It's not impossible. Do the two heavenly venerables still remember that this person achieved it outside of Bu Su heaven, so he definitely has an inheritance. Maybe it's an inheritance left behind by an almighty ancestor. As long as we find the location of his sect, we might be able to gain something. Dai Gong thought about it and felt that this was a feasible method, but he didn't have much hope. This kind of secret method, no matter who grasped it, would try to cover it up. Maybe it was passed on verbally or divinely, so outsiders wouldn't be able to easily obtain it. Bai Wei waved his sleeve and said, "There's no need to think about all this. Although we've cultivated the human path, didn't we still find another way and combined our strength to perform the fundamental superior grade scripture? Before this, we didn't know that there was such a path, so we didn't take it. Now that we know, we can deduce it ourselves in the future, so why do we need to seek help from others? Moreover, after we become the rulers of the world, we can perform the Tao again. So the human path can be abandoned." When Dai Gong heard this, he nodded and said, "Heavenly Lord Broad Victory is right to remind us that we are too stubborn. When I re-establish my Tao, all of these will be trivial." Bai Wei said, "Celestial Venerable Cheng'an, you cultivate the fundamental stop mantra, so your deduction technique is the most impressive among us. I'll have to trouble you to create an evasion technique for me to use." Dai Gong said, "That's not difficult. Two Celestial Venerables, please wait for me." As soon as he finished speaking, he immediately began to deduce. Because he was using his divine will, it only took an instant for an evasive technique to appear in everyone's mind. Bai Wei took a look and praised, "This method is wonderful." Dai Gong's voice was suffused with killing intent as he said, "Fellow heavenly exalts, I no longer fear this person, so let's make a move." Qian Luo was still suspicious. She said, "We can deduce the evasion technique, but this person can also use it against us. We still need to be careful." Lu Li also replied through the divine will, "Celestial Venerable Miao Yen is right. After you heavenly exalts showed up, that Taoist Zhang hasn't used this technique, but he still dares to expose it now. Then maybe he has a backup plan. Maybe he's luring me forward. Why don't we continue to use the artifact to threaten him? He can't threaten us anyway." Bai Wei wanted to be aggressive, but since the two said so, he agreed. Actually, they had the Tai golden bead. If they used this treasure, it would be easy to break the formation. However, this treasure was precious. Every time it was used, it would be used less. It could only be used at a critical moment to maximize its effectiveness. Also, they could feel that even if they killed Yuan Zun of the human path, there was still a hidden threat in the heavenly design. Therefore, as long as it could be solved by themselves, they didn't want to use this treasure. Apart from that, there was another reason that hindered them, and that was that they had to pay a price to use this treasure. When they used it before, everyone consumed a great deal of vitality. Fortunately, they had the Venerable Nine Revolutions Green Lord, so it wasn't too bad. However, they could feel that their bodies seemed to have suffered some damage, but they didn't know if they could recover. If they used it again in a short period of time, it might affect their foundation. Zhang Yan saw that the demon was unmoved at first, as if he had made up his mind not to show himself. However, under his senses, he saw that Lu Li's aura didn't seem to have changed on the surface, but in fact, his method of evasion was different from before. From this, he knew that the skill that he deliberately exposed just now was already known by those demons. It was just that this person was extremely cautious and wouldn't be easily fooled. His eyes flickered slightly. Before planning this, he had already considered this. What if the other party didn't pay attention to him at all? His countermeasure was to display an item in front of the demon. As long as this item moved, it was highly likely that the other party would make a move. However, this alone wasn't enough. He still had to make arrangements for the follow-up. With that thought in mind, he went into Taoist Yi's celestial star formation and said, "I'll have to trouble you to do something for me, fellow Taoist." Michihito Ichido stood up from his position and said, "What do you need me to do?" Zhang Yan transmitted a few words over. Michihito Ichido's eyes lit up, and then he said solemnly, "Don't worry, friend. I will do my best. Zhang Yan nodded and said a few words to Dan Yi and the others. Then, he calmed down and waited for an opportunity. Bai Wei and the others were still increasing the power of their Dao artifacts at a steady pace. They still had the upper hand at the moment, and it was entirely up to them to decide when to attack. Therefore, they weren't anxious at all. If Zhang Yan used the killing method again, then it would be a good opportunity to test it out. After several attempts, Lu Li finally broke through the 5 formations that had trapped him for a long time. At this moment, there was nothing under his feet. He saw a sky full of stars, as if he was in some kind of void. He knew that he had fallen into another formation. He wasn't surprised. The formations in front of him were actually not complicated. If the other party had only set up 5 formations, he would find it strange. However, he believed that it was a number. He believed that with every step he took, he could go a little deeper. In the end, he could force the enemy into a corner. At this moment, he suddenly sensed something. He looked over and saw Zhang Yan standing on a spirit boat that was flashing with spiritual light. However, since the latter took the initiative to conceal his aura, Lu Li could no longer sense him. But as long as he was exposed in front of him, it wouldn't hinder him from making a move. Lu Li chanted casually, and many spells fell on him. Zhang Yan didn't move. His body glowed brightly. Countless rays of sword light shot out from his divine will and slashed at him. Lu Li didn't dare to underestimate him. Even if these rays of sword light couldn't kill him, they could still cut his vitality. He had to be careful. However, after a few breaths, he realized that his spells stopped outside the spirit boat. It wasn't that he couldn't penetrate it, but he felt that there was nothing there. He couldn't help but feel a little surprised. Even if the other party could withstand the power of his curse, it shouldn't be able to do this. However, he could sense that this wasn't an illusion. He then shifted his gaze to the spiritual boat, and his eyes narrowed. Could this thing be? The 4 innate demons had the same divine will. When he realized it, the others also noticed it. At first, they didn't think much of it, but when Lu Li's divine will reached them, their expressions changed. Bai was slightly startled and said, "The heavenly boat made from the unfettered wood?" He frowned and was silent for a moment. Then, he shook his head and said, "We miscalculated." Back then, when the unfettered wood was lost, they had deliberately leaked the news. They wanted to use it to lure Zhang Yan into their trap. They hadn't expected that not only would he see through the mysteries behind it, but he would also be able to refine it despite the lack of Bu Su Heaven's treasures. The 4 of them suddenly felt that the situation was a little tricky. They originally thought that they could use the Dao artifact to slowly wear down the other party's strength. When they were confident, they would go up and destroy them. However, with this item, it was different. The unfettered boat was not affected by external factors and could avoid all spells. If the other party felt that he couldn't hold on, he could use this item to escape. They might not be able to find him. Even the Tai golden bead couldn't do anything to it because this treasure was only suitable for fighting enemies head-on. It wasn't good at tracking the enemy. Qian Luo sighed faintly and said, "Looks like we have no choice but to move." The other party was clearly telling them that if they couldn't win, they could use this boat to escape. The purpose of this was undoubtedly to lure them into attacking. For the sake of their future plans, they absolutely couldn't let this generation go. So, even if it was poisonous bait, they had to eat it. Dai Gong said, "This is obviously to lure me to show myself. Celestial Venerables, be careful." Bai Wei's expression was calm as he said, "We should be careful." He chanted and an incantation was imprinted into the 3's divine wills. He said, "The worst-case scenario is that we fall into this person's trap. However, this person's divine ability can only kill 1 person at most. As long as this person's chi activity appears, there will be an unfettered boat. I can also use a treasure to kill him. I have already left a protective incantation on the Celestial Venerables. Even if a Celestial Venerable's Dharma body is unfortunately destroyed, his soul will not be destroyed. In the future, when the rest of you control the Busu heavenly treasure, you can still bring him back. After the three of them reached an agreement, they didn't hesitate any longer. They immediately escaped from their concealment artifacts and appeared outside. In an instant, they had all landed at the edge of the formation. Zhang Yan had been waiting for this moment. He raised his head and looked over, his gaze suddenly sharpening. However, his target was no longer Lu Li, but Dai Gong's location. At this moment, without any hesitation, he immediately came up with the idea to divine. Because of that, he already knew the person's vital signs. Therefore, as soon as he used his secret method, he immediately found the person's true identity. Dai Gong also sensed it immediately. He couldn't help but feel his heart palpitate. He realized that the other party's divine ability had directly bypassed the process of searching for chi activity and directly landed on his true body. He immediately felt that something was wrong. He realized that the previous evasive method was not enough to deal with it. He didn't just sit and wait for death. Instead, he relied on that instant of feeling and quickly consumed his chi. He repeatedly calculated in his divine will, trying to deduce this method to a higher level. Even if he couldn't resist it, Bai Wei and the others could use it. However, before he could do all this, he felt an irresistible whaley crash into his chi sea. Before he could respond, there was suddenly a burst of golden light in front of him. Then, the void collapsed and everything was crushed. After Zhang Yan killed Dai Gong with a single strike, the LV Yuan golden bell in the sky lost its master. It let out a sigh of relief and the pressure on its body lightened. However, at the same time, a great sense of danger arose in his heart. A white light shone in front of him, accompanied by a sound of a sword that pierced through his mind. It had already slashed into his Dharmakaya. Chapter 1706. Even though Zhang Yan felt that his Dharma had been struck by an external object, he still maintained his composure. This was because he had already predicted that after he killed one, a flaw would appear whether he was willing or not. At that time, the fiendish demon would definitely use his most powerful attack in an attempt to kill him. Just now, he saw that it was a ray of white sword energy. It should be the pure yin-yang seal that could kill a true yang cultivator. Fortunately, he was prepared. Long before he came out, he had already used the glazed lotus cup to protect himself. At the same time, he had also rolled the Xian Yuan imperial seal into his sleeve. Even though these two treasures were not as proficient as the other parties, they were on the same level. Thus, they could still slightly resist. Thus, he took advantage of this moment to do something else. This time, he used the 9 formations visualized in his divine will to descend into the real world, instantly enveloping Bai Wei and himself. Then, the two of them disappeared from where they were. Just now, when Dai Gong was killed, Qian Luo was also shocked. She didn't know that Dai Gong had already exposed himself, but she couldn't help but think that if Zhang Yan was coming for her just now, it would be difficult for him to escape death. Even though she was terrified in her heart, her movements weren't slow at all. She relied on the technique Dai Gong had passed down to her before she gestured with her fair hand and put the treasure away. In fact, the treasures in the hands of the 4 of them all corresponded with each other. Even if one of them lost it, any one of them could summon it back. If it wasn't for Zhang Yan snatching the treasures when he killed Lu Li and they were alone, they might not have succeeded. At this moment, with the 2 Dao artifacts in her hands, she calmed her heart and tried to sense them again. To her surprise, she discovered that she could no longer sense Zhang Yan and Bai Wei's whereabouts. In fact, she couldn't even connect with Bai Wei in her divine will. It was as if they had been moved to another realm. However, she didn't believe that she couldn't find them. She immediately tried to divine. In the depths of the inner realm, Dan Yi saw a turning point and immediately said, "Fellow Fu, fellow Zhang's plan has succeeded. It's time for us to act." Fu Qingming responded. He didn't waste any time and immediately moved his avatar. The next moment, the 2 of them appeared outside the formation at the same time. They appeared on Qian Luo's left and right, creating a 2-on-1 situation. In the formation, Michihito Ichito immediately operated the formation according to Zhang Yan's instructions. No matter what Lu Li did, he trapped Lu Li in the star formation. At the same time, he looked at the battle in the sky with the soul-setting Rui in his hand. He was prepared to use the soul-setting Rui if the two of them couldn't win. The four innate demons were originally working together, but now that one of them had been killed, the remaining three were fighting on their own. Their original advantage was gone, and the situation suddenly became favorable to the human Dao side. Once Fu Qingming arrived outside, he took the opportunity before Qian Luo could activate the Lu Yuan Golden Bell again to make his move first. His lineage of Dao impartation was born with a vast and abundant vital qi. Even though he had become a Dao god now, there wasn't much of a change. The moment he activated his divine will, balls of vast and mighty green qi appeared like clouds and enveloped Qian Luo. Qian Luo's eyes were cold. Just now, she couldn't see her opponent. Even with the Dao treasure, it was difficult for her to display its true power. However, it was different now. She raised her wrist and caused the Qian Kun inverted gourd to shake. In an instant, everything turned upside down and mixed up. All the nearby aura suddenly became infinitely far away. Fu Qingming only felt as if his body was being pulled by an invisible force. He secretly exclaimed how powerful it was. If he tried to resist at this moment, then under the influence of this treasure, he would only fall into chaos. Even this thought of his might make a mistake and cause a completely opposite or deviate result. If his previous self was here, in front of this Dao treasure, he might be overwhelmed in a single move and fall into a bitter struggle until his origin energy was exhausted and he was killed. Therefore, he didn't choose to resist. Instead, he followed the force and tore himself apart. He even added another force. In an instant, a vast tide of origin energy exploded. Qian Luo frowned, and then she shook the bottle gourd once more, causing the surrounding true qi to immediately respond and return to its original calm state, and it seemed as if it had never erupted. But at this moment, her beautiful face changed slightly as she swept her gaze around, and she noticed that she was already standing on an enormous golden lotus, and there seemed to be boundless space in her surroundings. She knew that she'd been trapped by some sort of treasure. She looked around. Although she could use the magic treasure here, she couldn't sense the opponent's location. It seemed to be useless. However, a cold smile appeared on her beautiful face. If she couldn't find the person, then she could deal with the external object that enveloped her. So, she stretched out her slender finger and tapped on the gourd. The entire world instantly shook. In the void, Fu Qingming came back again. He had the body of a Dao god. Even the power that could heavily injure ordinary true yang experts just now couldn't do anything to him. He looked at the golden lotus that was constantly trembling and bending in Dan Yi's hand and said, "How long can it trap this person?" Dan Yi's expression was solemn. He felt that the golden lotus bud was gradually falling. It seemed to be slightly unable to bear the burden, so he said, "It's hard to know. Maybe a few breaths, or maybe a few days. If it doesn't work, we can't fight her head-on. We can only hide in the formation again according to the previous method." Although they had trapped this woman, not to mention the Qian Kun inverted gourd, she also had LV Yuan's golden bell in her hand. Her strength could be said to have decreased instead of increasing. If she charged out, they would definitely not be able to defeat her head-on. The key here still rested on Zhang Yan. As long as the latter could deal with that, or end the battle ahead of time and come out to help them, then everything was possible. At this moment, Zhang Yan was already standing in the grand formation of the 9 realms. Bai Wei was temporarily trapped somewhere and couldn't come out for the time being. He raised his eyes and looked inside. He saw a sword light that was like a white rainbow moving back and forth in the shadows of his past and future. This thing was the pure yin-yang seal. It was said to respond to the movement of vitality and could separate and refine people in the past and future. Every time a cultivator's past was killed, they would lose a part of their foundation. Every time a cultivator's future was cut off, they would eliminate a possibility. The final goal was to erase all traces of their existence in the present world. At that time, they would disappear without a trace. He felt his chi being continuously weakened, and he was falling at an extremely fast speed. He took a look at the glazed lotus and found that there was no foul chi in the treasure. He couldn't help but feel slightly surprised. For this to happen, either the lotus couldn't bear this power, or the pure yin-yang seal didn't really have any effect on him. Originally, he was going to use the 2 magic treasures on him to withstand it. If he could resist it for a while, then he would use the secret method and see if he could kill this person. If he couldn't, then he would hide in the Red Continent. However, he didn't plan to use the second method unless he had no other choice. Once he reached there would be no one to control the grand formation of the 9 realms. The other person would be able to charge out quickly, and the originally good situation would change again. However, the current situation was completely unexpected. However, there had to be a reason for this. After thinking about it for a moment, he looked again, and this time, he discovered some clues. That sword seal was chasing after the whole thing, because in his shadow of the past, only when his Dharma body and body became one could he be considered a complete person. In other words, this treasure had to cut off all traces of the past of these 2 people at the same time in order to truly succeed. Right now, his strength was only at the 6th cycle. If his body was in any part of the void origin sea, he would be cut by the magic treasure without any chance of escaping. However, this was where the change occurred. Right now, his body was in the Red Continent, in the reverse of heaven and earth. This was not a place the treasure could reach. This created a contradictory outcome. At this moment, even though he was being continuously weakened, it was because the treasure was suppressing him, but it couldn't completely erase him from the world. So, once the treasure left, he would be able to quickly recover. This was like climbing a mountain. As long as you hadn't reached the peak, no matter how close you were, even if you were only 1 step away, as long as you hadn't truly taken that step, you wouldn't have reached the final destination. He himself had not expected such an outcome, but this did not mean that he could rest easy. His chi activity continued to weaken, and his combat ability had already been suppressed to the extreme. If he were to clash with Bai Wei now, then that person could easily suppress him, and it would be exceptionally dangerous. Thus, after thinking about it again, he decided not to move for now. Bai Wei was currently in a certain region of the Grand Formation. He could feel the omnipresent pressure, but it couldn't do anything to a true yang cultivator like him. At most, he couldn't find a way out. Moreover, he had already activated the yin-yang pure seal. Even if he didn't know where Zhang Yan was, he could control the treasure from afar. Even if the latter hid on the unfettered tree, he still wouldn't be able to escape. However, what surprised him was that the treasure still hadn't returned. Clearly, it couldn't keep killing the enemy. He began to ponder and thought to himself, maybe this is because this person's foundation is especially deep. If the yin-yang pure seal met someone with a shallow foundation, even if that person was a true yang cultivator, then 1 slash could completely erase that person from the world. However, if that person's foundation was deep, or if he had a magic treasure to protect himself, then he might not be able to kill him in 1 strike. However, if he used a few more strikes, he could still achieve his goal. However, at this moment, he didn't know where Zhang Yan was. If he took it back, he might not be able to find him again. However, after controlling this treasure for so many years, this wasn't all he needed. The reason why this Tao artifact was called the yin-yang pure seal was that the past was yin and the future was yang. However, there was actually another meaning to it. The righteous path's strength was called yang, and the soft and strange changes were called yin. Just now, he was only using the yang technique. He still hadn't used the yin technique. This technique would cause a cultivator to fall into all sorts of dangerous situations in the past and future. However, no matter how hard they tried, they would still be defeated in the end. Thus, when their minds were led, they would deny themselves and use the cultivator's power to kill themselves. Thinking of this, he focused his mind. In an instant, his origin chi decreased slightly, and this change appeared. Chapter 1707. Zhang Yan was originally in the formation, but he suddenly felt his spirit sinking as if he was about to enter a muddle-headed state. However, his mind was firm, and he immediately woke up. He was surprised to find that his surroundings were different from just now. He was in a carriage. He was wearing a fox fur coat and was leaning on a soft cushion. He was holding a warm stove in his hand, and the sound of carriages and horses could be heard. He sensed for a moment and realized that his mighty force seemed to have been concealed, and he could not move it at all. At this moment, a familiar voice came from outside. Lang Jun, we'll reach the Azure Parasol Mountain in a few dozen miles. Everyone says that there are immortals living on this mountain, is it true? He thought about it and lifted the curtain to take a look. He suddenly felt a gust of cold air seeping in, dispersing much of the warmth in the carriage. Outside the carriage, the sky was clear and bright. The road was muddy, and there was snow melting on both sides. Fortunately, the stone road was flat, so it did not feel bumpy. The person driving the carriage was his loyal servant, Zhang Shi. After thinking about it, he realized that this was the year when his predecessor and his servant first entered Qinsang school to be apprenticed. He thought about it and immediately knew that this was most likely the effect of the pure yin and yang. He was immersed in his past memories, but what was the point of doing this? There was indeed such a divine ability to make one immerse themselves in the past and shake one's mind. However, those that were able to cultivate to his level were mostly people with firm dispositions and had overcome numerous tribulations, so how could mere matters of the past be able to shake them? He thought about it again and thought of a possibility. Zhang Shi heard that there was no reply for a long time, so he turned around and asked with concern, Lang Jun? Zhang Yan smiled at him and said, of course there are immortals. As he said this, he let down the curtain. Zhang Shi murmured, it's good that there are, it's good that there are. Zhang Yan sat back down. Everything in front of him, including the conversation, was the same as what his predecessor had experienced. However, he knew that things would not be so simple, so he wanted to see what the other party was up to. The carriage did not go far before arriving at the foot of the mountain. There was a pavilion there, and there were attendants from the lower house who stopped the road to ask questions. However, these people only knew basic qi cultivation and were not cultivators. Zhang Shilai had already inquired about this place. As long as one handed over a name plate and some money, one could enter. Hence, he got off the carriage to talk to the guard. But after a while, he came back with a worried look and reported, Lang Jun, the guards won't let us go up the mountain. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. In the impression of his predecessor, this place had been smoothly passed without any twists and turns. This was undoubtedly the doing of that magical treasure. He smiled and said a few words to Zhang Shi, ordering him to smooth things over. After a long time, the latter came back and said that the person guarding the pavilion still refused to bend the rules. Zhang Yan nodded to show that he understood. He got out of the carriage and sent Zhang Shi to find a nearby inn to stay. He picked up a defensive sword and a bamboo chip. After identifying the direction, he went to another mountain. He had been in the lower house for 3 years, so he knew that there was more than one way up the mountain. There were at least a dozen paths that were not known to outsiders. Since this path was blocked, he could go up from other places. It was not a problem for him. Of course, since he knew that this was an illusion, it was not his original purpose to go up the mountain. He just wanted to see how the treasure would react. It only took him 2 more days to reach the top of the mountain through a small mountain path. There were many twists and turns along the way. Tigers, leopards, bears, and insects all came out. He knew every pavilion that was built by cultivators. As long as he went in to rest, he would be fine. However, it did not work this time. However, he was not the youth who went up the mountain that year. With a bamboo chip in his hand, he could use the spiritual vigor of the mountain to set up an illusion and keep the mountain beasts away. Although there were always some accidents, such as the bamboo chip being swept away by the wind, or the sword slipping out of his hand, he still avoided them without any danger. However, the moment he reached the top of the mountain, the scenery in front of him changed. He appeared in the cave where he had practiced for 3 years. At this time, he was short of clothes and food. His chi meridians could not break through. The cave where he lived was about to be taken back by the lower house. He was about to fall into a desperate situation. He thought for a while and turned around to go down the mountain. This time, there was no external force to stop him. In fact, it was very smooth. He guessed that this treasure would put him in a difficult situation. However, if it could restrain him, it would be a joke. Although he was trapped in his own memory, he was still a true young almighty who could destroy the world with a single thought. Even if he could not use mana here, he still had countless secret skills and powers. If he really wanted to go through it again, why would he need to join a sect? Moreover, when he achieved the cave, he had created a Taoist legacy. Even if he did not have any external objects, he could open his meridians and break through. After that, he could fly in the sky and burrow into the ground. He could find other things to cultivate and continue his cultivation. With this thought, he seemed to have touched something. The scenery in front of him changed again. This time, he found himself in a dark and gloomy place. This was the Devil's Cave of the Sea's Eye. Outside, there were demonic shadows. It was as if he was surrounded by countless demons. He smiled and conjured an evasive spell. He walked out of the encirclement calmly. As he did so, the scenery shattered again. Since then, he had passed through more than a dozen scenes. Every time, he was in danger or in a difficult situation, but he easily dealt with them with his extraordinary experience and knowledge. At this point, he could almost understand the purpose of the treasure. Every time he gained a slight advantage and was about to defeat his opponent, the yin-yang sword mark would sense it and immediately move him to another memory mark. Once he suffered a setback, it would continue and then suppress him even more fiercely. This seemed to want the cultivator to deny himself. However, there seemed to be some problems with the circulation of qi here because the best way to do this was to conceal his own consciousness, but this treasure could not do so. In truth, when the yin-yang sword mark was used, the cultivator who was trapped would not be aware of any memories of the past or the future. The only thing they could use was the method they used at the time. This was equivalent to getting rid of everything in your life that was beneficial to you. Naturally, all that was left was the dark side of failure. True young cultivators still had their own Weili, so they had the ability to do whatever they wanted. Every time they fell into a desperate situation and thought they could not fight back, they would weaken themselves imperceptibly. However, the problem here was still the same as just now. Zhang Yan's physical body was still within the Scarlet Continent, so the treasure could not completely envelop him. There was a loophole. It was like the dreamer knowing that he was in a dream. Zhang Yan now understood that because his memories were complete, his mind was not affected at all. Even if he did not do anything, it would not be a big problem. However, he did not want to do this. Using the treasure required origin qi. As long as he successfully passed through the dangerous situation or turned the situation around, then every time he went over, he would be able to consume some of his origin qi. If the other party did not retreat, then he could very well keep them company. On the other side of the formation, Bai Wei had been using the yin-yang sword mark, but an instant later, he found that his origin qi had suddenly dropped. In an instant, he had used up 80 to 90% of his origin qi. His expression could not help but change slightly. He reacted in time and hurriedly stopped the technique. Because the yin sword mark had fallen into the cultivator's past memories, neither the master nor the treasure itself could tell what exactly had happened inside. Even though the treasure had gone through countless years of development, it had only been an instant outside, which was why such a situation had occurred. However, if he could achieve what he wanted, then this bit of effort was worth it. However, when he checked, he found that Zhang Yan was still safe and sound. He could not help but frown and think to himself, I never thought this person would be so difficult to deal with. Fortunately, it's not like I don't have any tricks up my sleeves. In the past, it wasn't as if there weren't people with a firm heart who wouldn't be moved by external factors at all. This was especially so for those who walked the path of emotionlessness. Therefore, if he still couldn't subdue his opponent like this, then there was still one last change. The yin-yang sword mark was clearly a sword, but the reason it was called a sword mark was because it could seal a cultivator within it and prevent them from escaping. Therefore, even if he could not kill this opponent this time, as long as he found an opportunity, he could make him unable to stand in the present world. However, to do this, the amount of origin chi needed was undoubtedly more. Just now, the deficit in the formation had greatly injured his origin chi. He was temporarily unable to do anything, so he could only stop and use the 9-turn green goblet to recover his origin chi. He was prepared to take down the opponent in one move after he recovered. At this moment, Zhang Yan also broke free from the past because he stopped. He discovered that the treasure was still entrenched in his body, but its aura was not as imposing as before. Obviously, he had achieved his goal, but there was still a sense of danger lingering around him. He guessed that the other party still had some powerful tricks up his sleeves. He thought for a moment and secretly prepared himself. Outside, Dan Yi had restrained Xian Luo for more than 10 breaths. He saw the golden light on the heaven-born golden lotus was flickering and the flower bud was trembling. His expression darkened. He knew that the opponent was about to break free. Fortunately, he and Fu Qingming had already retreated into a formation that had been set up beforehand. Even if the woman rushed out, he could temporarily trap her here and continue to delay her. In another formation, because Bai Wei was also using the 9-turn green goblet, Lu Li's origin chi was inevitably weakened. Lu Li was shocked. He knew that she must have run into some trouble. He had wanted to cover it up, but on second thought, he thought it would only make things worse. So, he just let it be. Michihito Ichido was in the same formation as Lu Li. Naturally, he sensed it as well. Previously, when the origin chi of the demon was almost endless, Michihito Ichido had guessed that Bai Wei might have obtained some nourishment from somewhere else. But now that the situation was like this, there might be something wrong there. However, he could not rule out the possibility that Bai Wei was deliberately luring him to make a move. He thought about it for a moment and decided not to make a move. Even if the other party did something wrong, he did not have the means to kill him instantly. He would not be able to determine the outcome of the battle in a short period of time. What he needed to do now was to trap him. As long as he succeeded with Zhang Yan, everything would be resolved when he returned. That being said, this did not prevent him from putting more pressure on the opponent. Lu Li visualized in his mind. Countless rainbows appeared out of thin air and surrounded Lu Li. Chapter 1708. In the formation, Zhang Yan gradually felt the sense of danger in his heart grow heavier and heavier. Usually, this kind of omen meant that the other side was about to use a killing move. Once it came, it would be difficult to defend against it. Bai Wei never moved from his position in the formation. It was obvious that he hadn't found a way out. The greatest threat was the yin-yang pure seal. This treasure was still in the avatar and was suppressing him. He couldn't use enough Fa Li to use the killing secret technique. Otherwise, he could use this opportunity to fight this person. He couldn't help but think about how to get out of this situation. The most convenient way was to escape into the Red Continent. That way, he would be temporarily disconnected from the primal void sea. This way, he could immediately escape from the treasure. However, there was no one to control the formation of the 9 boundaries. If Bai Wei escaped, Dan Yi and the others wouldn't be able to stop him. The situation would immediately collapse. Therefore, when he left, there would be someone to control the formation for him, or there would be another plan. This formation could only be controlled by someone who was proficient in changes. Originally, he could use an avatar, but the yin-yang pure seal was used to deal with true yang cultivators. No matter how many avatars he had, no matter where he was, as long as he was in the primal void sea, he would be affected and lose control. He thought about it. He could first find a way to escape into Patriarch Yi Haitian's forbidden area and try to use the seal there to resist the treasure. Even he had to rely on a turtle to enter and exit there. That place could seal true yang demons, and it was also where the glazed lotus cup was, so he might be able to avoid the treasure's power. So with a thought, he instantly appeared in a wide stone room. At this moment, he was in front of the altar where the lotus cup was originally placed. As he expected, as soon as he arrived, an invisible whaley enveloped him. The yin-yang pure seal suppression on his Fa Li and Qi was suddenly released. He quickly recovered. But at the same time, he could feel that the treasure hadn't left the avatar. In other words, as long as he went outside, he would no longer have the power of the seal. He would still be restricted, and he wouldn't be able to solve this problem. In this case, the only way to be free was to enter the Red Continent. However, after he left, he needed to maintain the formation of the 9 realms. There was indeed another way. He waved his sleeve, and in the next moment, he appeared in the formation that Michito Ichido was in charge of. As expected, as soon as he returned to the outside, without the whaley restraining him, the treasure reappeared, and his aura was suppressed just like before. When Michihito Ichido saw him, he asked happily, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, how is that demon?" Zhang Yan said, "He's still trapped in the array, but I'm temporarily limited by his Dao tool, so it's hard for me to get rid of him. Now I need to use a method, but I can't personally control the array that's trapping this person, so I need to use the Spirit World Rui." Michito Ichido handed over the Spirit World Rui without hesitation. "Fellow Taoist, just take it." Zhang Yan held the Rui, and at the same time, the imperial seal of Xian Yuan and the divine Dang Tianjing floated out. He said, "I will take this treasure, and the few of you will seem weak here. I will leave these 2 treasures here to help you." Michito Ichido knew that this wasn't the time to be polite, so he took the 2 treasures and said with a solemn expression, "Then you must be careful." Zhang Yan nodded, and he returned to the formation. He picked up the Spirit World Rui and felt the flow of aura in it. When he held this treasure before, he noticed that as long as the wish didn't cause the aura in the room to become restless, then the wish would be fulfilled. There were many reasons involved here, and he couldn't explain it clearly because he hadn't been in contact with this treasure for long, so he could only calm his heart. He focused his gaze on it, and then he made a wish, asking this item to control the formation for him. This wish wasn't excessive, and it was a spontaneous thought. A moment later, he felt a part of his origin chi being taken away, and he knew the matter was done. However, he found that his origin chi was originally suppressed by the pure yin-yang seal, but this Spirit World Rui could bypass this treasure and directly take it away. It could be seen that it was originally whaley, and at least not much weaker than the pure yin-yang seal. As expected of a treasure that could be made to hold wishes. At this moment, there was a flash of light, and the Spirit World Rui left his hand and fell into the formation. If there were no accidents, it would fall into the hands of the demon again. However, the battle would be even more intense, and this person might not have the chance to use it, or find the chance to use it. At this moment, Bai Wei's aura was gradually rising. It was obvious that when he recovered, it would be the time to make a move. He didn't delay any longer, and with a thought, he appeared in the vast Scarlet Continent. At this moment, he felt his body lighten. He could feel that the pure yin-yang seal had disappeared from his body. It was obvious that the treasure couldn't enter this space, and it had been isolated outside. However, the threat wasn't truly resolved. The next time his opponent saw him, he could use the Spirit World Rui to attack him again, unless he escaped into the Scarlet Continent every time. However, if that continued, he would be able to keep himself intact, but he wouldn't be able to defeat his opponent. The safest way was to deal with this matter once and for all. That way, there wouldn't be any future troubles. At this moment, even though there were no external objects holding him back, within the Scarlet Continent, the aura seemed to be frozen. It wouldn't recover, but it wouldn't weaken either. As a result, he calmed his mind and returned to the formation, silently waiting for his magic power and origin chi to recover. On the other side of the formation, Bai Wei's magic power gradually recovered. He was about to immediately seal Zhang Yan, but at this moment, he suddenly fell into a daze. Then, he saw that the pure yin-yang seal had returned to his divine will, as if it had never been used. What's going on? As the master of this treasure, he was able to detect some traces of his opponent after he took it back. But at this moment, when he sent his consciousness into it, he couldn't help but be shocked because he noticed that it was completely empty, and there wasn't a single trace left behind. Even he was slightly horrified. He didn't understand what had happened. If it wasn't for the fact that he had refined this treasure for millions of years, and the aura buried within it was deeply rooted, he might have left it outside. He frowned and fell into deep thought. Just now, due to the obstruction of the formation, he could only use this treasure to sense all of Zhang Yan's changes. Now, he couldn't sense Zhang Yan's movements. However, he was certain that Zhang Yan was still in this world. Since his opponent hadn't died, he had to consider his own safety. In this formation, it was the master of the formation. Without the restriction of the treasure, it meant that he could be found by his opponent at any time, and he couldn't take the initiative to attack. In that case, retreating might be a solution. However, he hadn't been here for long. It hadn't even been 15 minutes. Such a short amount of time was enough for him to find a way out. If he didn't care about anything else, it wouldn't be difficult. However, he couldn't care about that now. Because he knew that when Zhang Yan recovered his magic power, he would definitely come to find him and use the technique that killed Dai Gong to deal with him. Fortunately, it wasn't like he didn't have a chance. From what happened just now, it could be seen that Dai Gong couldn't block the yin-yang pure seal. He just didn't know what method he used to avoid it. As long as Dai Gong appeared, he could seize the opportunity and slash the treasure into Dai Gong's avatar again. The prerequisite was that he could avoid the technique. However, he had perfected Dai Gong's spell, but it wasn't safe. He needed to add another layer of protection. With this thought, he made a gesture and a pure-colored Taoist robe appeared on his body. This was the treasure that Bu Su personally refined before the great change in heaven. Unfortunately, the materials used in the first refinement were inferior, so it could never become a Taoist tool. After obtaining the yin-yang pure seal, he rarely used it. Now, in order to guard against the killing technique, he had to take it out again. Even if it could only obstruct Dai Gong a little, it was still useful. After Zhang Yan returned to the formation, without any external interference, his qi was recovering quickly. Although it wasn't perfect, he could attack earlier. However, he knew that the opponent in front of him had the highest cultivation among the 4 Khanate demons. At the same time, he was also the first Khanate demon to be a disciple of the human Tao. He wouldn't be easy to deal with. Moreover, this person had seen his secret technique, so he must have deduced a new way to avoid it. If he wanted to kill this person, he would probably have to go through a lot of trouble. Moreover, he also knew that until now, 6 of the 7 Taoist tools that were originally left by the human Dao Yuanzun had shown up. There was still one that hadn't shown up, and he didn't know if it was in the hands of this person. Although it wasn't used for battle, he still had to be careful. Not long after, his yuan qi and mana recovered completely again. Thus, he didn't hesitate anymore and started to deduce the location of the real body. Bai Wei's eyes moved. At this moment, he also felt something and immediately used the evasion technique. Zhang Yan felt that his qi was wandering, but his technique couldn't land on his body. After thinking for a while, he knew what the flaw was. He immediately deduced again and made up for the flaw. Then, he calculated again. After Bai Wei dodged a few times, he found that the flaws of the opponent's secret technique were getting fewer and fewer, and it was getting harder to deal with it. If he continued like this, it was equivalent to helping the opponent perfect this technique. He felt that this couldn't go on, because he couldn't leave this formation for the time being. Although he could still deal with it now, the opponent's secret technique seemed to be getting stronger and stronger. As long as he miscalculated once, he might end up the same as Dai Gong. Thus, he raised his divine will and said to the other 2 Khanate demons, "Today's situation is actually in a predicament. It's really hard to predict. Looks like we can only ask the Tai sect to break out of this situation." Qian Luo said faintly, "This move is extremely damaging to the foundation. Heavenly Lord Guangsheng should think carefully." However, Lu Li agreed and said, "I think that Heavenly Lord Guangsheng's words are feasible. As long as we can win this round, everything can be done slowly. If we lose now, then we have no hope of becoming the ruler of the world. That would be losing everything. Qian Luo didn't say anything else, obviously agreeing. Seeing this, Bai Wei didn't hesitate at all. He resolutely cupped his hands towards the sky and said, "Fellow Taoist Tai, please make your move."